with their
Please
names,
do.
because no one's done that.
Yeah.
You can only find one or the other. So we're going to try and get that
Right.
all together. We'll put that up, and then everybody can steal it for decades. So yeah, so I think that's pretty interesting. But I'm going to go with Mr. Gossett not being DB Cooper.
Well, what's interesting here in that you mentioned, and we talked a little bit about this, but there's a psychological aspect to this, and uh, people coming forward and wanting to place their name with this. As we said at the beginning, and I probably won't remember for our conclusions, but I've had friends now that have said, "Well, I listened to part one or um, part two, where I knew about this before, and it's really fascinating." And the angle on that is that it captures the public's imagination because it's a romantic idea that somebody actually got away with it. They pulled it off. No one got hurt. You waste a lot of money and time of people, and certainly got a lot of them really obsessed with your story afterwards. But there is some kind of ideal there where somebody beats the man at the system that beats the system, and then
Yeah.
they make off with the cash. They survive. They beat all the odds, or at least they died in the woods trying, I guess. But people want to latch on to that, and it's a weird, yeah. The psychological aspect of it is odd, in that people, like you said, the angle about telling that to his son. Maybe he thought his son didn't respect dad. He was just a degenerate gambler, lost all the money and this and that. But I had one good score
Yeah.
I can tell you about, and true or not, it's that. The key jangler aspect, as Scott and I call it. It's the guy who loves to tell the tall tales.
Yeah.
So it's interesting on that point, and you have just a few things that do line up and makes people wonder, and we're wondering about it right now.
Well, this brings me to my next guy on my list, the murderer. And when I say list, I mean John List, who maybe should have gone further up this list. He might have should have been the first guy, because I think it's just entirely unlikely.
Yeah.
Those of you that are true crime aficionados will no doubt have heard John List's name. He is a famous killer. I'm going to read this little sum up from Wikipedia about what he is known for. He was born September 17th, 1925, died March 21st, 2008. John Emil List was an American mass murderer and longtime fugitive. On November 9th, 1971, List killed his wife, mother, and 3 children at their home in Westfield, New Jersey, then disappeared. He had planned the murder so meticulously that nearly a month passed before anyone suspected that anything was amiss. List assumed a new identity, remarried, and eluded justice for nearly 18 years. He was finally apprehended in Virginia, everybody's going to Virginia, on June 1st, 1989, after the story of his murders was broadcast on the television program America's Most Wanted.
There you go.
After extradition in New Jersey, he was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without parole. List gave critical financial problems, as well as his perception that his family members were straying from their religious faith, as his rationale for the murders. He reasoned that killing them would assure their souls a place in heaven, where he hoped to eventually join them. He died in prison in 2008 at the age of 82. It's not a whole lot to talk about here, other than people speculated that he was DB Cooper. I think for no real reason other than just overall loose timing and coincidences.
Yeah.
For me, there is some resemblance, not much, but it's rooted entirely off the idea that a mass murderer has nothing to lose. The idea that he did it. He kills his family, and a few weeks later politely robs an airline. I mean, List himself confessed to being the killer of his family, but he made clear that he was not DB Cooper.
Didn't he also withdraw $200,000 from his mother's bank account, coinciding with the murder?
Yeah. So that's the other thing about it. So and he doesn't look like him, in my opinion. Not much at all, really. So that's that guy. Moving on. I'm trying to keep it flowing here, because we got a lot of people.
Thank you.
This is the instructor. That's my nickname for this guy, Ted Mayfield. And this comes from an article by Douglas Perry of the Oregonian. We have a link to this. This was published on 2018. It says the headline was "A New Clue Upends DB Cooper." This guy, Mr. Mayfield, was an outgoing, well-known Oregon skydiving instructor. He was a go-to for a lot of people, in fact, in terms of a suspect. His daughter said it was just completely unlikely. She actually remembered the FBI calling him pretty quickly to go through his records and see about the people he had trained, because they were looking for whoever might have learned how to skydive from him.
Mhm.
And she said she was on the phone when I guess the feds came into his office, and she was like, he was pretty calm.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, Cooper, very,
yeah,
very calm. Again, that's another characteristic that would rule out some of these characters here, I think.
yeah, yeah.
His demeanor.
Yeah, that's true. Strangely, in 1995, a long time after the Cooper hijacking, according to OregonLive.com, he was convicted of criminally negligent homicide in the deaths of 2 customers and was sentenced
Oh.
to 10 months in jail. He actually passed away back in 2015, and the way he passed away is pretty tragic. This is actually from a Mountain News article. I found this just today as I was doing last-minute organizing on this stuff. This was posted by Bruce Smith on August 30th, 2015. Longtime DB Cooper suspect Ted E. Mayfield was killed Friday, August 28th, in an aviation-related accident at his home in Sheridan, Oregon. He was struck on his arm while hand-starting an air coupe prop airplane and died of his injury at the scene.
Oh.
He
Oh.
was 79. He was well known in the DB Cooper case as the leading suspect in the early days of the investigation. FBI officials have stated that Mayfield was fingered by at least 6 callers the night of the hijacking, November 24th, 1971, but was soon cleared from the suspect list. Despite the official position, many researchers continue to feel that Mayfield was an important suspect, and his status was re-examined by 2 Portland investigators, Daniel Dvorak and Matt Myers, in 2006. Mayfield's death was quickly reported in DB Cooper chat rooms on the internet, and on Sunday, August 30th, I spoke with Ted Mayfield's daughter, Gwen, in Sheridan as his family gathered at his home. Gwen confirmed that Ted died from an accident with his airplane. She gave me details and also a commentary on the family's interaction the night of November 24th, 1971. By the way, I'm paraphrasing. We'll have a link to this article
Yeah.
if you want to read the whole thing, but
Okay.
Gwen said that Ted died Friday about 2:30 p.m. He was hand-starting a plane located in his backyard and the prop caught, nearly severing his arm. Gwen said that Ted just wanted to listen to the engine.
Hmm.
Because he'd been taking a blood-thinning medicine called warfarin, he bled
Oh,
out
boy.
within minutes. There were a
Yep.
lot of people around. The paramedics were on the line, but there wasn't anything anyone could do. So that is the story of Mr. Mayfield. I don't think he matches the picture much at all. Also, he was super cooperative with the FBI from the jump. No pun intended. He was,
Yeah.
he worked with them, and he was an outgoing guy. And I think a lot of people were enamored with what sounded like he had a lot of charisma. And so they're like, oh my goodness, it's got to be Ted. He could have done it. Because that's another thing I think people are doing is they're taking folks that they see as kind of heroic and saying, oh, it's him. It's this heroic skydiving instructor that I dove with when I took lessons, so.
Yeah. Oh, no, this is one of the first anecdotes I told way back talking about eyewitness testimony. And because I am older, I like to repeat my story, so I'm going to do it here. It's the the fact that people will have a bias or there's somebody in their mind that they've liked, as the fuzz will say, about a suspect. And I just remember somebody hitting a car on our street outside of my apartment, and everybody gathers in the morning, and this one neighbor guy, and I got a glimpse of the car. I knew it was white. I knew the configuration of the tail lights, but as it pulled away, so I didn't get a great look. And we're talking about like, well, what kind of a jerk would do that? Smashed into like 3 cars, took off, dragging a bumper and all that. And then this neighbor guy goes like, "Yeah, I'll bet it's my roommate. It's got to be my roommate." And he's like, "Oh, well, what kind of a car did he drive?" "Well, he drives a Red Thunderbird." It's like, well, no, I didn't see a Red Thunderbird.
Right.
It can't be. He's like, no, it was him.
Yeah.
He's a jerk. It was him. I haven't seen him for a couple of days. Probably came back. He was drunk. It's like, no, dude, that's not, no. But he was convinced, like, no, that's the guy.
Right.
So it's like finding something that lines up. In this case, it's really just the fact that he was a skydiving instructor, right?
Yeah, and I think, he was probably outgoing and well-known, and he was kind of a character.
Well, again, but if you look at what the FBI found, this guy was not a seasoned jump instructor. This guy was not a seasoned skydiving pro.
Right.
He made a lot of mistakes a pro wouldn't make. One, jumping when he did into the night in cloud cover into a thick wooded forest. All good chances of you not making it out. So that kind of rules it out for me, unless he was so much of a character, he was just kind of crazy and just, let me try that. But he didn't pass away until a while after.
Yes.
When was the prop accident?
August of 2015.
Okay, so quite a long ways afterwards.
Yeah.
That's it's a little thin for me.
Well, this brings us to the next guy on the chain, the Railroad Man.
Bill Smith?
Yes, Bill Smith,
Uh-huh.
William Smith. I like the Railroad Man better. So,
Yes.
so far, we've done the Boatman, the Merchant Marine, the Copycat, the Gambler. I'm doing pretty good here, right? The Murderer.
You're getting a little Stephen King there, or
Yes.
really Rod Serling. Like I will say again, the episode titles for the Twilight Zone, poetic, man.
Yes,
Just really
he was good
nails
at that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're doing a great job. But yeah, the Railroad Man, kind of spooky and
So the
creepy.
Railroad Man is following the instructor. This is a pretty fascinating story. This has a little bit of a, I don't know, it's like a Bridges of Madison County vibe, and you're going to see why I'm saying that.
Yes, I'm getting a strong Hallmark movie.
Yes.
Vibe here.
This author named Max Gunther published a book in December of 1985 called D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened. By the way.
We mentioned him earlier on.
Yes, we did. And by the way, every book is like, what really happened, mystery solved, blah, 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 but they all are like that. Anyway,
Right.
This book is very well received, though. It's reviewers really like this book. It's considered a mix of fiction and nonfiction, although that is open to debate.
Right.
The book tells a story about how a woman named Clara rescued Cooper, whom she found on her land with a sprained ankle. She took him in, nursed him back to health, and fell in love with him.
Oh.
Eventually, they romantically laundered the money together in Atlantic City before settling down in New York State. We have links to all kinds of sources for where this information is coming from. The FBI completely dismissed this. Special Agent Himmelsbach, who has since passed away, describing most of the book as, quote, filler. But there is one interesting thing. In Gunther's book, the main character visits a skydive center near Los Angeles, and while there, asks about jumping from a commercial airliner in the summer of 1971.
I don't like the peanuts on the flight.
Yes,
I just want to get off quickly.
If I
don't need
diarrhea,
to go all the way through.
The FBI released files in 2017 saying that nearly this exact thing happened and has been corroborated. But Gunther wrote about it 12 years earlier. So here's a fact in Gunther's book that lines up with an actual event that took place. Apparently, somebody did go to a skydiving school in 71 and said, how do I jump out of a commercial aircraft?
Yeah.
So the plot thickens here. This one goes pretty crazy. A U.S. Army data analyst calling himself anonymous for all his postings or her postings gets involved in really taking the book apart and thinks at first the man in the book is William J. Smith, a railroad worker. Now listen to this letter that was sent to Max Gunther before he wrote the book. This is pretty fascinating. Mr. Max Gunther, Ridgefield, Connecticut. Dear Mr. Gunther, I am D.B. Cooper, who took $200,000 from Northwest Airlines last Thanksgiving and left by parachute. If this matter is successfully concluded, I will supply evidence that this is authentic and I am the genuine article. That will come later, please be assured. I want to tell my story, particularly why I did what I did. It is important to me. The recent death of another man who tried the same foolish stunt makes me unhappy. But principally, I want to tell the story of what happens to middle-aged men in society today, and how the trap, here comes the message, and how the trap of marriage and money can close in on him until he must take a stupid risk to escape. The middle-aged and middle-income men are the forgotten men of our time. This is what I must tell, partly to make amends for what I did and to make the world think about we forgotten men. Boy, this is the best time to be reading this letter. I am writing to you because an article by you in True magazine in 1962 impressed me deeply. It was, quote, do-it-yourself divorce for fed-up males, end quote, in which you described the problems of disappearing. This extraordinary article was the start of my long journey. It started me thinking and showed me what the problems would be, particularly the problems of documents. More recently, I saw another article by you on the same subject in a woman's magazine, and I believe you have a feeling for this subject and will be sympathetic to me. I am making a similar contact with a book publisher. I will introduce you to that publisher when the time comes. I will give you sufficient facts to write my story, which I do not care to write out in full myself, even if I had the skill. You and the publisher will never, of course, meet me face to face. I ask you now if you would care to write my story for me. If so, will you agree to contribute to the New York Times Needing Cases Fund, 25% of your earnings from the project? Question mark. I have asked the publisher to make a similar contribution. Since I cannot participate in these earnings myself, I must see that some social good comes of it in the end. If you agree to these terms and wish to hear from me further, please place the following ad in the New York Village Voice of Thursday, March 2nd in the Village Bulletin Board section. Happy birthday, Clara, signed Max. After placing the ad, be patient, signed D.B. Cooper. So that's the letter that Gunther got. Anonymous, the data analyst, later amended his theory to thinking it wasn't actually William Smith himself, but in fact someone that Smith knew personally who he relayed the story through. So here's an important note. A full set of William J. Smith's fingerprints from his military service were provided to the FBI in November 2018. And there's an article here about that and the fingerprints. And I want to read this. This is from a Fox News article. Fresh D.B. Cooper's theory emerges years after the infamous hijacking. This is by Ryan Gaidos, Gaydos, journalist, or Gaidos. Okay, this actually makes reference to Claire, which is Dan LeClaire, which is the character in Gunther's book. The data analyst came forward and said that they had concluded that Claire wasn't in fact D.B. Cooper. However, he began to suspect a friend and co-worker of Claire's was the actual hijacker. William Smith, who worked with Claire at Penn Central Transportation, became the researcher's primary candidate. Smith died when he was 89, but a yearbook of his included a list of alumni who were killed during World War II. One name jumped out, according to the Oregonian, Ira Daniel Cooper. My problem with this is I still cannot figure out why anyone would use any part of their real name for this skyjacking.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Weird coincidence, though.
Yeah. So the analyst determined that Smith and Claire were both New Jersey natives who worked at the Oak Island rail yard in Newark. The anonymous analyst found Smith had served in the U.S. Navy, and the experience Smith and Claire gained working on the railroads would have helped either man find railroad tracks and possibly hop a train back east after parachuting from the plane. I believe he would have been able to see Interstate 5 from the air, the analyst told the Oregonian. Adding a rail line at the time ran parallel to the roadway. The analyst hypothesized that Smith used his friend's name to hide his real identity when he reached out to Gunther in the 70s, and that his wife took over communication with Gunther. The analyst also speculated Smith and his wife, a woman named Dolores, may have been in on the hijacking together. Dolores retired at the fairly young age of 54. A grudge against Penn Central, the railroad, may have also been a motivating factor for Smith, the analyst told the Oregonian. Penn Central went bankrupt in 1970, leaving thousands without jobs. The analyst said anger at the corporate establishment may have driven Smith to undertake the hijacking. The Oregonian noted that the FBI had not responded to the data analyst's research. The analyst also found several other links to bolster his theory. So, and this goes on to point out that Cooper was likely familiar with the Seattle area, and research suggests that he may have worked for Boeing. The researcher also pointed out a clip-on tie the FBI determined was tied to the Cooper case had certain metals on it that led investigators to believe Cooper may have been a Boeing employee. But the researcher said a person who worked on the railroads could have had similar traces of metals. And by the way, I incorrectly stated a few minutes ago when I said that Smith was not the guy. Smith is the guy, but the analyst is saying that Smith is a friend of the person who wrote the letter to Gunther saying they were D.B. Cooper.
Yeah, not actually DB, right? Actually, this Dan Cooper, but somebody who knew them and used their story for what purpose now?
Just to relay the information, to get it out there.
Yeah,
and that so all these details would line up. And there's some folks that think that there are things about it that make sense, but I don't know. It seems pretty convoluted. You know, the love story and all of that. It makes for a good book.
Yeah, this is one of the more complicated scenarios, I must say.
Yeah, it is. And so that leads us to the titanium tangent.
Yes.
So I want to talk about this a little bit because the metals that we've referred to that were found on the tie left behind on the plane, there was titanium, metallic titanium in there.
Right, in its natural state, non-alloyed.
That's right. By the way, I have a titanium car key. My 1990 300ZX, the key famously is made of titanium. I still have it, the original key. It's very lightweight and strong. In 1971, titanium was a strategic metal primarily used in military aircraft. And this comes from citizensleuths.com about the titanium particles. We have a link to this section. Metallic titanium was not found in consumer titanium particles. We have a link. All titanium used in aircraft is alloyed, and the Cooper material was pure titanium.
Right.
Due to the lack of alloyed titanium, Cooper did not work in the aircraft industry. Spiral chips of aluminum and other exotic metals like bismuth and stainless steel were found on the tie as well. Spiral aluminum chips of the type found on the tie are made in metal fabrication plants that use lathes and drill presses. The interpretation here is that Cooper worked in or had access to an exotic metal fabrication facility that contained titanium, aluminum, and other specialty metals. In 1971, only engineers and managers in fabrication plants wore ties to work. So the interpretation by the citizen sleuths is that Cooper was either a manager or an engineer, something we alluded to earlier.
Right.
Cooper's knowledge of the workings of the airplane, the use of the parachute, and his construction of a bomb, end quotes, suggest he may have been an engineer. Continuing on about titanium, the rarity of titanium and the limited number of places that it could be found in 1971 made it a focal point in the investigation. The fact that military or commercial aircraft all use alloyed titanium exclusively, alloyed meaning mixed with other metals, ruled them out since the particles found on Cooper's tie were pure titanium. The supersonic transport made almost completely out of titanium was canceled that year, throwing the entire titanium industry into turmoil. There were large numbers of layoffs due to the cancellation, so it's still conceivable that Cooper may have in some way been affected by this slowdown.
Right. And that was Agent Carr's thinking that this person fell upon hard times. Cooper.
Right.
Needed the money, had a grudge about it. It's starting to fill that profile.
Right. And so they go on to point out that it was a rare metal in 71, and this makes it extremely unlikely it is a post-event contamination. Its presence constrains Cooper to a limited number of managers or engineers in the titanium field that would wear ties to work. This is also consistent with his mannerisms during the hijacking, where the flight attendants described him as an executive, in quotes. The fact that he was also comfortable enough to pull off the hijacking wearing a suit suggests that it was a regular part of his wardrobe, again consistent with a manager or engineer type. Given pure titanium with embedded stainless steel, spiral chips made from aluminum and other exotic metals gives a best fit indication that Cooper came from or regularly visited a metal fabrication facility. These types of materials are known specifically for their corrosion resistance and commonly used in highly corrosive environments, such as chemical factories. A suspect having worked in a machine shop or a company that used pure titanium in a corrosive process would be a good match to the family of particles found on Cooper's tie. So that's the titanium tangent, which relates back to Gunther's book about the guy working at the railroad and the possibility there. Although I don't know what the likelihood of titanium being involved in the railroad would be at that point. That might rule him out. And it's another one of those things. It's this information, which obviously the FBI has, that may rule out a good portion of suspects for them. Because they say, nope, this doesn't make sense. Why would he be around, pure titanium? If none of these people would, then that puts a mark in the negative column. They make that list on the whiteboard that says things that line up, things that don't line up. It's going to be pretty hard to match pure titanium and bismuth on the tie. And also, as these guys, the citizen sleuths pointed out, it doesn't make sense as post-contamination either.
Well, you wonder about that stuff, and to my point is that it's the diverting accident. Boy, I better come up with a better title for something like that. But it's like you don't know where Cooper got the tie.
Right.
Maybe he got it at Goodwill.
Right.
Maybe he nicked it off of some guy's lunchbox as he was visiting somewhere, knowing that he was going to leave it. And why did he leave the tie in the airplane? He could have just thrown it out. He could have worn it with him. I'm sure he thought like it's going to be flapping around. Maybe it was left on purpose. And of course, I don't think he would have the foresight to know that they were going to look at it with microscopy and determine what metal particles were embedded in the tie. Or what spores of plant life was going to be on it, trying to narrow him down. But it could be an accident. So you can take those things and make that part of your profile, but they're not 100% certain. I think they narrowed it down, and I think it might give you a lead because if somebody had reported like, yeah, I had my black tie stolen and I'm a manager at this exotic metal scrapyard. Yeah. You can start to put a pattern together because obviously, yes, he's a physical human being. He crossed paths with people. He went places. There's a trail there, but you do wonder what exactly that trail is.
This brings us to the smoke jumper. This gentleman's name is Sheridan Peterson. And all of this comes from one guy, a gentleman named Eric Ulis. He's an entrepreneur from Phoenix. who is, quote, 98% certain that now 90-year-old Sheridan Peterson is D.B. Cooper. And we're taking this information from OregonLive.com. We have a link to the article that this comes from. Mr. Ulis, if I'm saying his name right, forgive me if I'm not, if you hear this, Mr. Ulis.
Or Ulis, maybe.
Ulis? Maybe it's Ulis. Eric Ulis. Ulis. He thinks that Mr. Cooper landed in an area called Bachelor Island, based on updated research. And some of this comes also from the Mountain News in Washington. And I'll read a little bit about this from that particular article. This was published on June 27th of 2018. Regarding Sheridan Peterson, he is one of only 3 people known to have had their DNA compared with the partial DNA profile extracted from Cooper's tie. This among a field of approximately 1,500 suspects. You see now why this episode is so long. We're only talking about 12. The other
Let's get to the other 1,400.
Yeah, the other 2 suspects that DNA was compared on were Duane Weber coming up and Lynn Doyle Cooper also coming up. He is the only one of the 3 DNA compared suspects who has not been publicly cleared by the FBI. He was formerly employed by Boeing as a technical editor with access to the Boeing Aerospace Division and Supersonic Transport Project. That takes us to titanium that we were just talking about earlier. He was an expert skydiver with smoke jumping experience and described as a maverick in skydiving circles. However, he was living in Nepal during the skyjacking, not employed at the time for over 2.5 years, provided no alibi during the skyjacking timeframe. He opened a confidential numbered bank account in Singapore in 1971.
Who hasn't?
And his, I still have one. I had to make deposits there regularly. And D.B. Cooper's tie clip was sold as a set that also included a tie tack and cufflinks. Manufacturer was a Rhode Island-based company called Anson. Shout out to one of my favorite Twitter followers, Anson Birch.
That's right, yes.
Sheridan owned a pair of the cufflinks that were included in those Anson sets. He has been reticent to discuss D.B. Cooper. However, when pressured, he denies being Cooper. He resembled the physical description given by witnesses. He first came to the attention of the FBI and became a suspect 9 days after Thanksgiving Eve hijacking that occurred, as we all know, Wednesday, November 24th, 1971. Continued, listen to this. Actually, the FBI had good reason to suspect me, he wrote in a 2007 issue of Smoke Jumper, an obscure magazine published by the National Smoke Jumper Association. By the way, big shout out right now to the smoke jumpers who are currently trying to save the entire western half of the country from going up in flames. Our hats are off to you guys. The country owes you so much. I had a friend that used to do that, and I know how dangerous the work is. And I just want to say on behalf of Astonishing Legends, like anyone cares what we think, but we do want to say thank you so much for being out there on the front lines with all these fires.
Absolutely.
So in the magazine, friends and associates agreed that I was without a doubt D.B. Cooper. There were too many circumstances involved for it to be a coincidence. He then listed some of those circumstances in quotes. At the time of the heist, I was 44 years old. That was the approximate age Cooper was assumed to have been, and I closely resembled sketches of the hijacker. But what was even more incriminating was the photo of me simulating a skydiving maneuver for Boeing's news sheet. I was wearing a suit and tie, the same sort of garb Cooper had worn, right down to the Oxford loafers. It was noted that skydivers don't ordinarily dress so formally. These are all good reasons why the average person on the street might conclude Sheridan Peterson is D.B. Cooper. It is not enough for federal investigators looking to build a case for trial. The FBI moved on to other suspects. Yet the Bureau couldn't completely quit. For some reason, the FBI decided to send Mary Jean Fryer, an FBI agent in 2004, out to knock on his door 3 decades after the hijacking when he was 77 years old. Fryer says she has no idea why it took the Bureau so long to decide it should interview Peterson. She and another agent talked to him at his apartment, took a swab for DNA, and sent a report and the genetic sample off to Washington, D.C. That was the first and last thing Fryer had to do with the case. She never even heard whether the DNA matched. He was a charming guy, she says of Peterson. He had a lot of knowledge about the jump from the plane because he'd been a smoke jumper, and he was clearly interested in the case. He also seemed interested in being a suspect. I think he gets a kick out of the attention, Fryer adds.
Well, there you go.
During his interview with the FBI agents, Peterson expounded on the case in surprising detail, including that one of the parachutes the skyjacker had been given was a pilot's emergency rig, a detail the Bureau still held close to its vest at the time. He also insisted he wasn't D.B. Cooper. He claimed he was in Nepal on November 24th, 1971, living in a mud hut near the base of Annapurna. A couple of years ago, Eric Ulis talked to Peterson on the phone and exchanged a few emails with him. Peterson had not responded to calls from the Oregonian. So again, I'm reminding you, I'm reading this article written by Douglas Perry from the Oregonian or Oregon Live. And some of those prior points are actually from an article submitted to the Mountain News directly by Eric Ulis. So it's a little bit mixed up there. I apologize for that attribution, but we'll have all the links in the show notes. A couple of years ago, Eric Ulis talked to Peterson on the phone and exchanged a few emails with him. He did not confess to Ulis, but as he did during his FBI interview, he proved knowledgeable about all things Cooper and offered a possible motive. He told me he was radicalized while in Vietnam assisting refugees. What he describes as atrocities by U.S. soldiers radicalized him. I think he just snapped. He found himself out of a job and didn't feel he owed American society anything. Mary Jean Fryer, for her part, says she loves Ulis's passion for the case, and she admits it's possible he's on the right track. When Fryer left Sheridan Peterson's apartment that day in 2004, she found herself grinning. She turned to her fellow agent and apparently said that might have been D.B. Cooper as they stood outside Peterson's home, but we'll probably never know. So there is a whole counterpoint argument to this, and I'm just going to sum this up. This actually comes from the D.B. Cooper Hijacking blog, which is run by Adventure Books, who are fairly convinced that it is not Sheridan Peterson. We're going to talk more about their point of view here coming up. So, but keeping in mind, you always have to consider the motivation of the person giving the message or presenting a counterpoint theory. Still, this stuff makes sense. One of the things that they said, and this was written by Robert Blevins, who wrote another book we're going to be talking about tonight, about reasons that they didn't think that Sheridan Peterson could be D.B. Cooper, was the chute selection by the hijacker. And we've talked about all those parachutes, but one of the things that they said was that as he started to put on the chute, Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant, actually later told the FBI that Cooper seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Although Peterson was quite familiar with parachutes and their use, he wasn't a paratrooper and probably would have at least given it a cursory check before putting on an unfamiliar military parachute. So they're pointing out that the fact that he knew how to use a military chute shows that he was almost certainly associated with a paratrooper outfit in one way or another, but Sheridan wasn't. They also said his eye color wasn't right, and this comes up a lot. Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant, told the FBI she was sure that the hijacker's eyes were some shade of brown. The official FBI poster listed Cooper's eyes as brown, and Sheridan Peterson's eyes are not brown. They also suggested here on these counterpoints that the terminology wasn't exactly right. He demanded 2 front and 2 back chutes, which was an old-fashioned way of saying he wanted 2 reserve front chutes and 2 main chutes, which would more likely be said by someone who knew how to use a parachute but actually hadn't jumped in a long time. They speculated that his level of preparedness was too low. He had loafers and a suit, didn't make sense. They also pointed out that he was investigated and dismissed by the FBI, and that Peterson's entire life is basically an open book. He's very out there. He's actually written a book, which still isn't published, but it's about his time in the military. And they went on to add that he was in Tibet at the time, as he said, living in a mud hut. What was interesting about this was they're pointing out that there's a passport that points out his travel, and he has a kid, Sheridan Peterson does, that was born within a year of the hijacking. So in order for him to get from Tibet right after having this child and pulled it off and then gone back there without using a passport seems unlikely. So it's an unlikely thing, but I'll tell you what, when you look at the picture, these two folks look a lot alike. There is a very striking resemblance between Sheridan and the D.B. Cooper sketches. This brings us to our next suspect on the list, Uncle Dan, I call him. This is Lynn Doyle Cooper. This one I actually remember when this came out in 2011. I don't know if you do, Forrest. This was about a woman who claimed her uncle was probably D.B. Cooper. And this was based on overhearing at a very young age, like between 8 and 10, hearing her uncle planning some kind of devious thing with another family member, also an uncle. And I actually got this story from ABC News. We have a link to it, but here's a little segment, an excerpt from it. Marla Cooper said that as an 8-year-old, she recalled her 2 uncles planning something suspicious at her grandmother's house in Sisters, not far from where D.B. Cooper jumped from a plane with $200,000 in cash one day later. Quote, my 2 uncles, who I only saw at holiday time, were planning something very mischievous. I was watching them use some very expensive walkie-talkies that they had purchased. She said she now believes the men were practicing for the post-hijacking recovery operation. Quote, they left to supposedly go turkey hunting, and Thanksgiving morning I was waiting for them to return, end quote. See, our suspects are getting more interesting. A day later, Northwest Orient Flight 305 was hijacked, and her uncle, L.D. Cooper, came home claiming to have been in a car accident. Quote, my uncle L.D. was wearing a white t-shirt and he was bloody and bruised and a mess, and I was horrified. I began to cry. My other uncle, who was with L.D., said, Marla, just shut up and go get your dad. Marla Cooper is now convinced there was not a car accident, but that her uncle was injured crashing to earth in a parachute. She says that she also remembers a discussion about money that day. I heard my uncle say, we did it. Our money problems are over. We hijacked an airplane. He literally just said that.
She really? Said, he just said that?
Yeah, I guess he just came right out.
Did you remember what we just did? What was that? Oh, yeah, we hijacked an airplane.
She said it later became clear, however, that there was no money. It is believed that the hijacker lost much of the cash as he came crashing down. And some of the hijacking money was recovered in 1980, as we all know, when it was washed ashore on the banks of the Columbia River. Sort of washed ashore, I'm going to put in air quotes. Marla Cooper said that her two uncles wanted to return to search for the cash, but her father refused. She believes this was because the FBI search was just beginning to take shape. So, by the way, this is the guy that connects back to the comic book that we talked about earlier tonight. The Franco-Belgian comic, Dan Cooper, which Forrest has already covered. Turns out that Lynn Doyle, or L.D. Cooper's niece, Marla, recalled L.D. being obsessed with the Dan Cooper comic, saying that he even had one pinned to his wall, in spite of the fact that he was not a skydiver or paratrooper.
Well, this proves nothing.
This proves nothing.
This proves nothing.
Digging into this.
Look, they share the same last name.
Yeah, right. Which again, why do you use your real name?
I'm going to pull. Yeah, that was my big revelation for the end of this segment. But yes, very simple thing. He goes to all this other trouble. Don't use your real name or any part of it.
Yeah, exactly. We's using code names. It's from Raising Arizona. But like, here's a little excerpt from the ABC News story. The FBI said the DNA found on the hijacker's clip-on tie and DNA taken from the daughter of potential suspect Lynn D. Cooper is not a match. However, FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt said, that doesn't suggest that the current lead is a dead end.
Right. Remember, we quoted Agent Gutt earlier because he just said, well, yeah, we found DNA, but we can't tie that to the hijacker even.
That's right.
There's no absolute proof to it. It's interesting. You can take samples from it. If you make a hit, boy, that's interesting. That's really fascinating. But the DNA lifted from the tie, yeah, you don't know if that's Cooper's or not. Could be somebody else. Same thing goes with the 60-plus fingerprints lifted from the cabin.
Yeah.
You don't know if any of those are Cooper's or not.
Right. And the glass, the glass was mixed together. And again, I want to go back to the fact that the whole thing about him drinking bourbon, and this is something I was going to bring it up in the conclusions, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it now. In 1971, I'm going to guess that 98.7% of men love to drink bourbon and chain smoke. All right. So I get tired of like, he drank the same. He loved bourbon and he chain smoked. Yes. So did every freaking man in my entire family. That's just not, that just doesn't mean anything at all.
I know.
But also, so, he only had one drink and half of it spilled. That's what we found out.
2 drinks. Yeah,
no,
2 drinks.
It was wrong. That's a myth. We talked about this off Sluggo's site. He had one and half of it spilled, according to Sluggo. And also according to Agent Carr.
Yeah. Okay. I thought he... from what you said, he drank one drink, ordered a second, but that one spilled. But you're saying he only had the one.
It was one and half of it spilled. That's what Sluggo's site says.
Dang, he didn't even get a good buzz going.
Right. And the other thing is he had 8 cigarettes, which another agent or somebody, or maybe it was in the Brad Metzler thing, or it might have been the Net Geo documentary, The Skyjacker That Got Away, I think is the name of that one. Somebody was like, that's not chain smoking in 71. 8 cigarettes for over because they were on the plane a long time, hours and hours.
Yeah.
That's not chain smoking. So
figured the plane took off 2:50 p.m. sometime around there, a little bit before 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
That's 5 hours later, roughly.
Right. Yeah. So chain smoking in that amount of time would have been a pack or 2.
Right.
Just something, it's interesting to think about how these things get characterized. However, when it comes to the pictures, I don't know. I don't think that the pictures, the sketches of Cooper and LD Cooper match up, although I find LD compelling. But I mean, for one thing, LD has a really pronounced widow's peak, which you don't see in the sketches of Cooper.
Right.
Of course, I'm conveniently picking what I like and don't like because my favorite suspect is bald and Cooper has hair. So, Well, we'll come back to that later.
Right, but okay, just to back up to reiterate, you're saying though that you have found photos of each of these suspects, and
Almost
you
all
will
of
be
them.
able
Some of them
to.
there
Okay,
aren't any, and some of them they're pretty hard to find. But yeah, there's one or two where I couldn't find anything. Certainly not from the right period. But most of them you
right,
can. It's the thing about this
right,
investigation being so popular. There's a lot of info about it online, as you might
right.
have been able
Well,
to tell.
yeah, and
By the way,
you
is it
do
okay with
know
you if I
the
don't really edit this at all? Can I just like
It's fine. Look,
mix it and
make a
put it out?
4-hour file. That's fine. It's just folks, we've flubbed here and there. We get tired of our mouths moving so much in a articulated fashion. We flub a lot, so we try to clear that up as to be
I'll do
less
what I
annoying.
can. I'll do what I can.
Okay, do what you can. Don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
But you do know the nickname for one of the composite sketches, right? They call it the Bing Crosby.
Oh, I
Sketch.
can see that. Yeah, the Bing Crosby.
So there's a little bit a mix
I
between
didn't
Bing
know that.
Crosby and, of course, people say Kevin Spacey.
Right.
Hey, buddy, was it just hijack a plane? Oh, I had nothing to do with hijacking a plane.
Yeah. And now it's time to talk about the con artist.
Hold on 1 second. Before you do.
Yeah.
Marla Cooper was 8 years old.
Yes, I pointed that out. Yeah.
Yes.
We did a hijacking.
I'm just saying,
I know.
a child's imagination can kind of run wild.
Yes. Also, kind of a hard thing to remember. Also, at 8, well, I guess hijackings were in the news a lot. That might have stuck out to you.
Yeah,
I mean, it's about,
I'll say that.
I was 3, 2,
Yeah.
or no, but she heard that when she was 8. Yeah, so she's like 6 or 7 years older than me. So now we get to the con artist. Just imagine a title card if we weren't just audio only. Duane Weber, the con artist. This again, Douglas Perry from the Oregonian. This guy has written so much great stuff about D.B. Cooper, and this is from their website, and we have a link to it.
I like this one. Yeah, this one I like Duane.
Yeah,
I like the story.
You like Duane for the crime.
I like the fact that the way the information comes through his wife.
Yes.
And some sleepwalking, and you go ahead and tell the story.
Well, yes, I want to tell the story. This and the article was headlined as "New Evidence Upends D.B. Cooper Case. The Unusual Suspects Continue to Fuel the Legend." Nice headline, Douglas. Maybe your editor did that, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
So first I'm summing up a little bit, then we'll read some excerpts from the article. So this con artist, who also went by the name John Collins, reportedly gave a deathbed confession in 1995. He said to his wife, Jo, he says, "Come here. Come closer." He's about to die, so I'm just doing
that's
Rosebud.
He's not being creepy.
Yeah.
Yes. No, he's just out of breath.
He wanted me to get about 2 feet from his face. And he says, "I have a secret to tell you." And she said, "What?" And he said, "I'm Dan Cooper." And then he died. No, I don't know if he died right after that. But after Weber died, Jo started doing some digging into his life. And she wrote into the Oregonian in the year 2000, which I can't say without thinking of Conan O'Brien. In the year 2000. Quote, "Duane always had been secretive about his past. Now Joe began to recall odd bits of information, objects, and incidents that made her believe her late husband may, in fact, have been the skyjacker. He had a history of incarceration. He had a history of military service. He chain smoked and drank the same liquor Cooper had drunk on the flight." Honest to God, I forgot that was coming up right now before I made my big thing a minute ago.
Hey, look, if it's a particular brand.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with the cigarettes. The Raleigh cigarettes were a smaller brand. So we will hear something about those coming up here.
Yeah, they were. But if you have any older relatives who smoke and drank a lot, especially cigarettes, they had a very particular preference for certain brands. You didn't really stray from what I remember. And then and if it was a rare bourbon, I mean, it's not like it is now with so many artisanal ones, but different bourbons have been around quite a long time. And of course, if you were able to make a match between a particular brand, particular cigarette, you need a bunch more of this circumstantial evidence, then you might take notice. But yeah, you're right. These are generalizations.
Yeah. Jo went on to say that she had once seen an old Northwest Airlines plane ticket that disappeared after she asked about it.
Oh, dear.
which,
You know what's happening here.
yeah, let's not get into it.
well,
Duane had taken her on a trip to the Northwest and had driven her to a spot in Southwest Washington where he told her Cooper had walked out of the woods. Of that trip to the Northwest, that's where D.B. Cooper walked out of the woods, Joe recalled Duane telling her. I said to him, how do you know that? And he says, maybe I was on the ground. She just took it as a joke. Former FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who worked the Cooper case until his retirement in 1980, took Joe seriously. She has never seemed to me to be interested in personal publicity or enriching herself in any way from this. All right, well, listen to what Wikipedia has to say about Duane Weber. Duane Weber was a World War II Army veteran who served time in at least 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968 for burglary and forgery. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow, based primarily on a deathbed confession. 3 days before he died in 1995, Weber told his wife, I am Dan Cooper. The name meant nothing to her, she said, but months later, a friend of her told her of its significance in the hijacking. She went to her local library to research D.B. Cooper, found Max Gunther's book, and discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting.
Wow. That's quite something.
Yes. She then recalled in retrospect that Weber once had a nightmare during which he talked in his sleep about jumping from a plane, leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. He also reportedly told her that an old knee injury had been incurred by jumping out of a plane. Like the hijacker, Weber drank Burden and Chainsmoke. We already did this part. Saying it again because everyone likes to point that out. Other circumstantial evidence included a 1979 trip to Seattle and the Columbia River, during which Weber took a walk alone along the riverbank in the Tina Bar area. 4 months later, Brian Ingram made his ransom cash discovery in the same area. However, the FBI eliminated Weber as an active suspect in July 1998 when his fingerprints did not match any of those processed in the hijacked plane, and no other direct evidence could be found to implicate him. Later, his DNA also failed to match the samples recovered from Cooper's tie, though the Bureau has since conceded they cannot be certain that the organic material on the tie came from Cooper.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is a section here in one of the books I read, which I'll be referring to tonight as we get closer to the end here, believe it or not. But the book is called Into the Blast, The True Story of D.B. Cooper. And that is written by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins and published by Adventure Books of Seattle. I want to read this section from that book. I'm paraphrasing here. Joe told the FBI that her husband said, I'm Dan Cooper, while he lay dying of kidney disease in March of 95. She began a dialogue with Ralph Himmelsbach of the FBI and later submitted some of her husband's personal articles for DNA testing. However, the evidence against Weber is inconclusive at best, and he cannot be placed anywhere in Washington State or Oregon at the actual time of the crime. Weber, a con man and small-time crook, visited the Northwest occasionally but had no parachute experience. The Bureau closed their investigation on Duane Weber in July of 98. Later, they announced that his DNA did not match the small amount of evidence from the tie. Joe Weber continued to insist that her late husband was Cooper, no matter what the FBI said. That's an interesting little section there, but in terms of the picture, I don't think it lines up. And in terms of reasoning, again, this comes back to what we said earlier about going out in a blaze of glory after a lifetime of running cons. And
that's right.
It falls into that thing. I was D.B. Cooper.
It's an interesting take on
Kiss the
sky. Let me drop the mic. And
mic drop.
People stop dropping mics.
Mic drops. Yeah.
Just a note here about people make a lot of, they put a lot of weight into Deathbed Confessions. But I think what you've summed up here outlines this rather well, in that book, if he had checked out a book at the library, was fascinated by the case, had made notes in the margins. What a weird thing that she discovers that, her husband's handwriting, if it was, or maybe she's just imagining it, because at this point, it sounds like what you just said. She was 100% certain her husband was D.B. Cooper, no matter what the FBI said.
Yeah, and also, it's a great cover story for all kinds of things. If he's out of town, he could be getting up to all kinds of bad business.
Well, that's
what
I was alluding to.
Yeah, it's
alluding to earlier, and then
not to cast aspersions on the dead.
No,
I'm
no,
just saying,
no.
If you're already known as a con artist, the story that you're one of the most famous heist guys in history, it's going to take a little more to convince me, anyway.
Right. I'm just saying that she may have also been convinced of that, and then once you're stuck on that record groove, that's it. So everything lines up. No need to look any further. But what I was going to say about Deathbed Confessions is that if, especially towards end of life situations, a lot of people are delirious a little bit. I will say that about some relatives who've nothing confessed, but towards the end have said some very unusual things. And we talked about this in the near death episode, in that that was more supernatural stuff. And you can say, well, they're just imagining, but a lot of talk about relatives coming back to meet them.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of at death, and I'll say this from experiences in my own
Yeah.
family and loved ones in my family. There's also, depending on the nature of the illness they're succumbing to, there's delirium, there's
Yeah.
hallucination, there's
That's what I'm
all that
saying.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And there's, I mean, there could have been a line between if this guy's on his deathbed, and anyone is. It's to your point. I'm just agreeing with you here.
Yeah.
Like when you're in
Yeah.
that frame of mind and you're looking back on your life and reflecting, maybe with grandiosity as you're about to, cross the threshold, you might be like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, by the way, I was DB Cooper."
Well,
So
yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying is that a very close friend of mine whose father, sadly was passing due to cancer, started to make like minor admissions, nothing big, but there was a point where they had expressed something that they regretted doing as a young man and never mentioned it to the family. No one ever knew about it. It was nothing big, but it was something that they regretted having done. And my friend was like, wow, I can't believe dad would say that. But you're trying to get stuff off your chest. And this person, my friend's father, was, in tremendous pain and a little bit of delirium, but you're going over what you've done in your life. And like you said, it's either you want to get something regretful off your chest that's been bugging you, but you never told anybody about, or you're going off with some imagining. And this person may have been fantasizing here and there throughout their life about having pulled off a good caper. And it doesn't, my point overall is that it doesn't mean that it's absolutely the truth. However, we're all interested in Deathbed Confessions because at that point, it's like, well, what else you got to lose? Might as well tell the truth.
don't be surprised if I say it. If I manage to live when I'm on the edge and I'm about to go,
Right.
don't be surprised if I say I am DB Cooper. All right, we're down to my last two suspects here. I know it's been a long journey. I want to thank those of you that haven't clicked stop for continuing on. This is in after this, we'll get to our conclusions and a nice little wrap up overview, but you probably have your own at this point. This guy is one of the major players on the suspect list. A lot of people think he was the man, and you can see why. I call him the mercenary, although he
Mhm.
wasn't really a mercenary. He was in the military. He did do some side jobs, it would seem, while he was, but I don't think he got paid for them. He did them in trade for weapons for CIA operations and that sort of things.
Uh-huh.
This gentleman's name was Robert Rackstraw, and I read an entire book about this guy. The book, which was extremely compelling, is called The Last Master Outlaw: How He Outfoxed the FBI 6 Times, but Not a Cold Case Team. It's written by Thomas J. Colbert. I don't believe that's Colbert. And Tom Zolossi, Zollosi, published by Jacaranda Roots Publishing, which I thought was a very good name for a publishing company, especially for this book, because those roots will destroy your house and plumbing if you plant the tree too close to your house. I planted a jacaranda tree,
Jacarandas?
yep, and
You did.
I had to take it out because the arborist came by and was like, "Oh, that's too. Isn't your sewer line right there?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's got to go." Which is, of course,
It's still up there, isn't it?
no, it's on the side that it's safe to be on. There were twins, remember?
see.
Originally,
Yeah.
there were twins.
Yeah. I've
There's-
told you this from the beginning, and I apologize to those who might be fans, but I make no secret of it. The jacaranda is my least favorite tree.
You can't stand that tree. I forgot about that.
It smells like for a lot of the year, it smells like pee-pee. It looks
Does
great
not smell
2
like
weeks
pee.
out of the year.
Oh, come on.
It's a floral scent. The purple, the lovely purple petals fall, and then they're sticky.
Okay, this is all apologies to Jacaranda Roots Publishing for our
I'm sure they have nothing to
Jacaranda
do
tangent.
with the nature, the
Jacatanda.
botanical nature of the tree. But yes,
So let's talk about Robert Rackstraw. I guess the FBI considered this book that these guys wrote a very professional investigation. Now, the book has a lot of details. I mean, life story, all kind of stuff. I read all of that, but there's no way we're going to get into all of that here. But if you want to know more about this guy, you got to check the book out. He's a real life sort of bad guy version of Jason Bourne, with a lot of exaggerations thrown in and some real stuff. I don't mean he's that adept at,
Yeah.
survival.
Would you liken him to the Tom Cruise character in the remember when he was the cocaine flyer?
Oh God,
Remember that
yeah,
movie?
yeah.
It's pretty good.
Similar,
Yeah.
but the thing about Rackstraw was that he claimed to be doing all that stuff and he wasn't really. But he was still in country and doing a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about him a little bit. A lot of this story centers around an ex-Colombian cocaine runner who took a polygraph saying that he witnessed the planning of the burial of the $5,800 of skyjacking ransom money found on Tina Bar. So that actually comes from Last Master Outlaw. And he said that the mastermind, D.B. Cooper, would be in planting that money, would be doing it to prove to the authorities that he didn't survive the jump. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to read the book. So anyway,
okay.
One of the characters in this book who's claimed to have buried the money himself, a drug trafficker, bragged about it, but he wouldn't say why to his friends. Well, the authors of the book then uncovered that the trafficker was good friends with a, quote, badass Vietnam vet who had been one of the original suspects, Robert Rackstraw. So keeping this straight, and this book is complicated. All these relationships are complicated, and it's hard for me to convey all of it, so I'm just touching on a few things. But the drug trafficker, whose name was Briggs, knew this and claimed that this money was buried there by the person who was D.B. Cooper. And then the authors figured out that that guy, Briggs, who is now deceased, knew Robert Rackstraw.
Okay.
Colbert speculates that Rackstraw is technically a psychopath. And in the book, he suggests that the guy, who was also a serious adrenaline junkie, was also a consummate liar, a con artist, and would do anything to get ahead. And he draws circumstantial connections between Rackstraw and 3 pseudonyms of con men pulling all kinds of elaborate scams in the Pacific Northwest. One of them was very similar to the stories of David Hampton, who was the con man that inspired the movie 6 Degrees of Separation and that play as well. He quotes an undercover state investigator whom his co-author had known for 10 years as saying, quote, "A master criminal like Rackstraw appears in America once every couple of years. Between July and December 1971, you've documented 3 within 100 miles of each other in the Northwest. Real estate aerial pilot Robert Rackstraw, vacationing Swiss pilot Norman de Winter, and D.B. Cooper, a hijacker with obvious aviation skill sets. Many Norman de Winter eyewitnesses claimed he looked very much like Robert Rackstraw, and your investigative team says Rackstraw is a dead ringer for the FBI Cooper sketches. Also, your detailed timeline reveals that whenever one vanished, another popped up. And after Rackstraw went home for good, the other 2 disappeared forever. It's statistically impossible for 3 master criminals to all be operating within 100 miles, let alone 3 that look alike, have the same flying skills, and their arrivals and departures are synchronized like whack-a-mole." That's from The Last Master Outlaw. This is from the book we mentioned in the Kindle edition, page 86. So what I'm saying is that in the book, they track down 3 operators who all are doing the same kind of things. And the author actually points out that De Winter, the name De Winter, that pseudonym, was taken from Alexander Dumas' novel, The Three Musketeers. There was a Baron De Winter in that.
One moment here. So
yes,
this person, the author, the co-author, in conjunction with the undercover agent, they're proposing that D.B. Cooper, Robert Rackstraw, and Norman de Winter, a Swiss pilot, are all the same person.
Yes.
How do you fake being Swiss?
I mean, it was just like 6 Degrees. You have to read.
But he had an accent. He had
all that stuff. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a sophisticated dude here. So, but here's the other thing. He was a serious individual. He had tons of medals from Vietnam. A lot of them were real. A lot of them were also made up. He was also a crack helicopter pilot. And for most of his life, he had access to both helicopters and small aircraft. However, he was prone to making mistakes, too. During one delivery of a new helicopter where he was supposed to be transporting it by flying it, and he brought along a friend to deliver it, he made a basic fuel miscalculation and it crashed. It ran out of gas and came down. But he brought it down in such a way that he managed to keep him and his buddy alive on a ranch. And the ranchers who were coming up noticed as the helicopter was totally trashed that this guy was standing outside high-fiving his friend.
Well, of course you would.
Yeah.
Well, as they say, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing.
Anyway, this paints a fascinating, highly detailed portrait of Rackstraw's life as kind of a maniac. And along the way, he is abusing wives violently. He's undertaking high-profile rescue missions under heavy fire for like a trapped general in Vietnam who he actually rescued.
Right.
He would steal weapons and gear from the base that he was at and then hand it off to CIA operatives that were in country, but only if they agreed to take him on covert missions so he could be a part of the action. But those missions were all off book and unsanctioned by his superiors, so he was in direct defiance of orders when he went on them. But at that point, he got exposure to how the CIA worked and probably made some contacts. He was an expert jumper. He had pretty much no fear of anything. And the book, again, The Last Master Outlaw, is very quick and compelling read. And the picture it paints is pretty convincing. But for me, the most compelling part of it really comes down to one incident, and that's the setup for the Ingram family to find the $5,800 on Tina Bar. This is where you're going to be freaked out. I see you reading it right now because this is the first time you're hearing this, I think. According to the book, the drug trafficker, Briggs, got drunk, and in an effort to show off to some friends, his name was actually John Richard or Dick Briggs. I'm actually going to quote this from page 168 of the book. In it, he's trying to convince his friends that he is, in fact, himself, D.B. Cooper. And to prove it, he does the following. Quote, on November 24th, 1979, Briggs suggested a trip, 79, right? This is the anniversary. This will be 8 years after the kidnapping. Think about the date also, 79, right before 1980. Briggs suggested a trip to the 8th annual D.B. Cooper Day celebration in Woodland, Washington. He told us he had gone up the year before, and this year he wanted me to go with him. He's talking to his two buddies. Upon arrival in Woodland, Briggs put on a t-shirt he purchased with I am D.B. Cooper emblazoned across its front. As he mingled with a sizable group of Cooper legend devotees, Carlson watched him carefully. He never broke character. The real D.B. Cooper, secretly rubbing elbows with the faithful. All he kept telling me was, I just want to tell these people who I am. We spent the whole dang day and night, and all he wanted to do was jump up and say, hey, I'm here. The next time Carlson was in a crowd with Briggs, it was at a jam-to-the-walls party on February 7th, 1980, in Shell's apartment building on Portland's Hayden Island. Spotting something he'd been looking for, Briggs took the still skeptical Carlson and Burke, these are the two friends, aside, and said, quote, I'm going to prove to you that I am who I say I am, end quote. He said, pointing discreetly to a couple across the crowded room. The pair looked like a nervous hippie couple, in quotes. Out of place, Carlson recollected. Before you guys get to Phoenix, talking to his buddies now, they and their little boy are going to find some of my money, Briggs said. He then walked to a window overlooking the Columbia and pointed, quote, over there on the Vancouver side of the river, end quote. He then gave the runners a meaningful stare to make sure they knew exactly what money he was talking about. Their expressions told him they did. Carlson and Burke didn't know what to say, each thinking this was a gigantic load of malarkey, even for Briggs. Moments later, he wanted to introduce them to the couple, but the runners somehow managed to decline and leave the party without incurring Briggs's wrath. Their boss, it seemed, had really gone over the edge this time, and they were relieved to get away. So that's pages 167 and 168 in The Last Master Outlaw, the Kindle edition. Well, 4 days after that, the couple that Briggs' friends saw him talking to at the party were making international news about how their 8-year-old son had found $5,800 in missing D.B. Cooper money in the sand on Tina Bar on the Columbia River's North Shore. Later in 2015, the family was asked about it for the History Channel documentary that the authors of the book had a part in producing. So again, this is from The Last Master Outlaw. This is on pages 188 and 189 in the Kindle edition. When the question came up about how his son discovered the money on the Columbia River, the father took a big breath. I said, let's build us a fire here and burn some logs. Brian said, yeah, okay, Pappy. So I grabbed up some driftwood and I'm looking around and stuff, and he runs up and gets on his hands and knees. He says, let me clear us a place, Daddy. And I said, not right there. Let's do it right over there. You see them two little sticks over there? Let's do it right there. Why Duane thought the two sticks were an important detail for his 35-year-old retelling, we didn't know, but the instructions certainly raised Forbes's eyebrows. The reporter followed up with a surprise. With their permission, he pulled out a laptop and played the footage of former runner Ron Carlson's 2011 interview, queued up to the part about the Ingrams colluding with Dick Briggs on the Tina Bar money stunt. The documentary cameraman zoomed in on Duane as he suddenly removed his glasses, closed his eyes, tightened his facial muscles, and grimaced. Then he turned away from the rolling allegation and wrung his hands over and over. At the tape's end, Brian was silently side-glancing at his father. Duane nodded toward the screen. That guy was tweaking. He's a drugster. He don't have no idea what he's talking about. Forbes was ready for him. Well, I'm wondering why years later he would come out, and I'm presuming you would say, concoct this story. I don't know what to say, muttered Duane. All right, so coming back to the big picture here, coming out of the book, less than a year after Briggs did all of that, he was running around paranoid that he would be killed. And in the small hours of December 12th, the cocaine trafficker's car ran off the road and flipped, killing him. A friend of his had been with him up until 4:30 a.m. that night because Briggs was so afraid he was going to be killed. But by who? Well, the implication is Rackstraw, wanting to protect his secret. Who else could have planted that money? Colbert details how Briggs was an excellent fence, too, laundering money by the popular method of turning it into South African Krugerrands at the time, which are made of pure gold. If Briggs was laundering money for Rackstraw, that means that he knew everything that was going on. They all worked together at a flooring company at one point, apparently coating floors for basketball courts and gymnasiums, including Pepperdine. Can you believe that? That was in the book. But did Rackstraw talk Briggs into planting that money on the river and then kill him for being sloppy or loudmouthed about it? Hard to say. Was Rackstraw a killer? Well, I'd seen a lot of action in Vietnam, but Colbert's book also goes into great detail about the distinct possibility that he murdered his own stepfather and buried him in a shallow grave on his own land. That's Rackstraw. But in what appeared to be a kangaroo court, Rackstraw was acquitted of that charge. So that's the whole story there. The other thing about Briggs, Forrest, is that the witnesses, everyone that knew him said, even though he was a cocaine dealer and all that stuff, is that he didn't drive fast. He wasn't a crazy driver, and that the accident was out of character for him. And that he was pretty sure that he was going to be killed soon. So there's something about the book I can't get past, even though I loved reading it personally, and I highly recommend it for anybody that's interested in this story. Aside from the river story and the $5,800 being found on Tina Bar, I feel like the whole rest of the book is about circumstantial evidence. And this might make them mad. Maybe they're going to want to contact us. So all due respect, because I think it's a great book. Tons of research, a lot of work has gone into it.
And they'll replant that Jacaranda tree in your yard.
Yes, I know. Well, unless I'm misunderstanding something, it's entirely possible, because also I have to admit I inhaled this book in about 24 hours. But there's a part of me that feels like there's a bias towards Rackstraw. And there's cases like this with many of the suspects because he so perfectly fits the idea of what criminal investigators think D.B. Cooper as a person would have been like. Rackstraw could be charming, but he was also a misogynistic jerk, according to the book. He was strangling. I know he's strangling his wife in front of his children at one point, one of his wives. So the question is, would this guy really be as polite as D.B. Cooper was supposed to be to two flight attendants? Right. It's hard. That's hard to say. It's a little bit of a leap for me, but he's been considered a strong suspect for a long time. However, he was ultimately dismissed by the FBI. But according to the authors of the book, there was internal controversy over dismissing him. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to read this sum up on Wikipedia about Rackstraw. In 2016, Rackstraw reemerged as a suspect in a History Channel program that was connected to these guys, and a book. On September 8th, 2016, Thomas J. Colbert, the author of the book, and attorney Mark Zaid filed a lawsuit to compel the FBI to release its Cooper case file under the Freedom of Information Act. The suit alleges the FBI suspended active investigation of the Cooper case in order to undermine the theory so as to prevent embarrassment for the Bureau's failure to develop evidence sufficient to prosecute him for the crime. In January 2018, Tom and Donna Colbert, that's his wife, they worked on this together, reported that they had obtained a letter originally written in December 1971 that says that codes that it contained were deciphered and matched to 3 units Rackstraw was a part of while in the Army, and the FBI refused to acknowledge the findings because, quote, it would have to admit that amateur sleuths had cracked a case the Bureau couldn't, end quote. I'm going to go on to point out here that one of the Flight 305 flight attendants reportedly did not find any similarities between photos of Rackstraw from the 70s and her recollection of Cooper's appearance. Rackstraw's attorney called the renewed allegations the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and Rackstraw himself told People.com it's a lot of expletive, and they know it is. I'm going to go with BS being the expletive there. The FBI declined further comment. Rackstraw stated in a 2017 phone interview that he lost his job over the 2016 investigations. When approached by Colbert about claims that he was D.B. Cooper, quote, I told everybody I was the hijacker, before explaining the admission was a stunt.
Well, there you go. He just admitted it was a hoax, so case closed.
Case closed. In May 2019, fairly recent, Colbert came out with some additional information. This was again published by our friend Douglas Perry, who's not our friend. He's probably mad at us now for using every article he ever wrote.
and massacring this,
yes.
this story.
Published by the Oregonian. Hats off to you, Mr. Perry. Please don't be mad at us. But I want to read this from this particular article, which was titled, D.B. Cooper Letter, newly released by FBI, offers startling coded clue that might reveal Skyjacker. This was published on May 17th, or excuse me, posted January 2018 and updated May 17th, 2000.
Didn't this also appear as an article with New York Magazine, I believe?
Oh, yeah, I think it might have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty interesting little segment, and we're wrapping up Rackstraw here, so bear with me. The letter offered up details of the Northwest Airlines hijacking case that hadn't made it into press reports, such as the fact that the FBI was not able to glean any usable fingerprints from the plane. Agents carefully combed through the December 11th letter. The writer's claims that he wore a toupee and putty makeup and left no fingerprints, as well as the admission of feeling hate, turmoil, hunger, and more hate. Colbert says this hate was Rackstraw's anger at being booted from the military for lying and other transgressions. Then there are the seemingly random strings of numbers and letters at the bottom of the page. The Bureau's investigators didn't know what to make of them. In a December 15, 1971 internal case memo, the FBI laboratory wrote of one of the sequences, the significance of the number 717171634 asterisk, appearing next to the copy count in the lower left corner on the face of the letter, remains unknown. It has remained unknown for 46 years until quite possibly a month ago. Rick Sherwood, a relatively new member of Colbert's team, has made sense of it and the other odd number letter combinations in the letter. Sherwood served in the Army Security Agency, the military's elite signals intelligence outfit during the Vietnam War. He describes the training as the equivalent of 2 years of college in 16 weeks. It was tough. Rackstraw briefly served as a chopper pilot in the ASA at the same time Sherwood was with the unit, though Sherwood says he didn't know him. After the FBI released the December 11, 1971 letter last November, Sherwood began studying the possible ciphers in it, using his ASA code-breaking training to search for links to Rackstraw. It took him about 2 weeks to figure out the code, with the initial light bulb moment coming when he simply added all the numbers up. Surfacing out of what appears to be a mishmash of unrelated numbers and letters were Rackstraw's Vietnam military units, the 371st Radio Research Unit, and the 11th General Support Company, as well as the Army Security Agency. It wasn't a sophisticated code, but Sherwood wasn't surprised the FBI couldn't crack it in the early 70s, because it would have made no sense to them. For the FBI to do it, they'd have to know a lot about the individual. I was trying to connect the numbers and letters to him. Could Sherwood have accidentally created this solution to the code because he was trying to find a connection to Rackstraw? It's not impossible, Sherwood says, but what are the odds that these digits would add up to this? Astronomical, 1,000,000 to 1. Rackstraw didn't think anyone would be able to break it. And this is parenthetical. Sherwood walked the Oregonian through the code-breaking process he used, with the understanding the details wouldn't be included in this article, since they are a key part of the second D.B. Cooper documentary Colbert is working on. Paraphrasing here, Western Illinois University's criminal science professor Jack Schaefer, a former FBI agent and psychologist, found Sherwood's code-breaking work to be first-rate. Since these correlate with identifiers in Rackstraw's Army life, I'm convinced this letter was written by D.B. Cooper, he told Colbert in an email. This is your strongest piece of evidence linking him to the hijacker. Rackstraw himself, it should be pointed out, often has refused to rule out that he's the legendary skyjacker. He boasted back in the late 1970s that given his skill set, he should be on the FBI's list of suspects. I wouldn't discount myself or a person like myself, he said. They say I'm him, Rackstraw told a California reporter last fall. If you want to believe it, believe it.
Narcissist.
Yeah, and here's one of the last things said, right, they're paying me to tell the story they want to hear. He died 3 months after that, on July 9th, 2019, from a heart condition. So that's the question, like you just said. Is he bragging? He told a lot of lies in the course of his life, according to Colbert, both Colberts and Sleuths. You can read the book for yourself and decide. The Last Master Outlaw, how he outfoxed the FBI 6 times, but not a cold case team. So this is one of the strongest guys, even though the FBI has dismissed him. I think a lot of people on the backside of this investigation think that Rackstraw could be the dude. I mean, I think the money story is compelling, but I really want to know more about that. I think the letter, the letter is compelling too. But again, does it connect back to the actual crime? I don't know.
Yeah,
This, you know,
the description of Rackstraw's personality.
yeah,
And again, if it's DB, is he just playing a part during the commission of the crime for 5 hours, being cool as a cucumber and polite, like you say, and courteous? And really, the only threatening thing is he said, like, no funny business or I'll do the job.
right.
Or does it sound like the behavior of this purported psychopath and obvious mega narcissist, or sociopath, just doesn't care about certain things, has that weird adrenaline junkie thing where they don't fear death? Would he be more calculated in planning a jump with better supplies on him?
Yeah,
And here's the weird thing. So yeah, the weird aha moment in your sectional tale here is about Brian Ingram. Okay, so to back up, because this could be significant, you're saying the cocaine drug runner, this guy named Briggs, he's drunk and he's bragging to his buddies, look, I can prove to you that this hippie couple's going to freak out because they're going to find the money. So at this party, basically, going back over this again as I listen to you read this,
Yeah.
he goes over to the couple and he tells them something, and he looks back to his buddies, and they see that the hippie couple's freaked out. This would be the Ingram parents.
And he's basically saying, over there, you're going to, because they were on the banks of the river, the opposite bank. He's saying, over there, you're going to find, if you look around, you're going to find this money.
Okay, so there's no other implication. It's not like Briggs was paying them off to find the money.
No.
Because here's the other thing. You could plant the money as a way to possibly, like I said, divert FBI attention, saying like, well, there you go. We found part of the money. Maybe he's dead. It's not a direct proof. You'd probably bury a shoe or something, something else just besides the money. It's weird that some of the money's missing. It's weird that the money got separated from the main pack. But the money has to be found. So to ensure that, Briggs is saying like, look, I'm going to make sure that the money is found by this one couple that happens to be camping or now is encouraged to go camping at Tina Bar.
Yeah.
How did Briggs know they were going to be there?
Right.
A few days later.
Oh, because he told him to go there.
Right. So now they just plan
He didn't know it. He told him. He said, there's money.
Right.
You should go over there and look around. There's money.
But here's the thing. Okay.
He
so
wasn't
now we go back to
predicting
the
where
money.
they would be. He was saying,
Right.
you need to go over here.
Here's where I have a problem is that now you're hearing the tale. Okay. Answer me this. Who's telling the tale of Papa Ingram looking all nervous in the documentary when they go over this?
Because in the History Channel show, they went and that's an excerpt from what they actually said in the History Channel show, which you can watch.
Okay, so
yeah,
right. So then Briggs's buddies happen to notice, like, oh my gosh, there's the hippie couple.
Yes.
And they're talking about
They're
the
on the
story. He
news.
looks really nervous.
Yep.
Okay, aside from all that, you have to go back to the money. Okay, so now the money's found. If he tells the guy, well, you're going to find a pile of money, is it spendable? No, it isn't.
Right.
So here's the other thing is that going back to science, and here's where I'm going to leave it, with at least with that part, and we talk about this all the time. You hear a legend, you hear a long, drawn-out, complicated story, and some parts could be true, some parts could be embellished, some parts could be totally false. It could all be a mishmash. And when you latch onto a couple of things that turn out to be true, or at least very interesting, that fuels it. Doesn't mean it's completely true. But if you look at science here, now we know recently here about the diatoms. So if you're going to trust the Cooper research team that diatoms were found and therefore the money could not have been, well, two things about the money. The money could not have been planted in a wet condition, exposed to the natural water elements at any point other than the spring. So it wasn't, so Cooper would have had to plant the money there. The other thing
There's
is that
a supposition there, though, is that the diatoms were deposited there after the money was put on the riverbank. So if they had the money all those years and it was exposed to the diatoms in the spring, wherever other location it was
it could have been any other
and
spring,
then brought to the river, right? Because they're not carbon dating them. So and then it's brought to the river and it's found within 30 days or so, or whatever, from when Briggs put it there to when he tells the hippie couple to go over there and look for it. And Briggs also
Right.
scientifically may not have had any idea that it was already so deteriorated. He might have thought, oh, they'll dig it up, it'll be fine. Because he's no
Yes, but okay.
scientist by any means.
Well, no, but the other part of it is that the bills obviously show hydrologic wear and tear.
Right.
They're rounded, deteriorate around the corners. That means they did spend some time in the water getting beat up.
Right, but it's not clear in this story, I don't think, when Briggs put it there.
Right, but he's putting then old, like they water weathered some portion of the bills, then planted them.
No,
in
he
the
might have had them, and they were exposed to the diatoms in the spring wherever they were, and then he put them over there 6 months ago, and then told the couple where to find them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So then he's got a plant already pre-weathered, pre-diatomed in the spring.
Diatomed, but not necessarily weathered. The weathering could have happened after he put it there.
No, that's my point here, is that at least with the Army hydrologist and also Tom Kay, they're saying that the rounding action of the bills means the corners and the edges were roughed up by rocks in the riverbed, the water action, roots, all the stuff of having traveled or at least been eroded, erosion properties from water. It wasn't just sitting in a pool of water. They weren't just wet and moldy. Is that it got beat up. They just don't know when it got deposited or how long it spent in the water. So that's my point, is that, yeah, you could do that, but he would have had to have planted already deteriorated, weathered bills at that spot for them to find.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that doesn't stick with me, but the rest of it, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, he's one of the most fascinating suspects so far.
Well, let me tell you where I'm at on this.
Yeah.
Not that you asked. And not that anybody.
Oh, I will be asking.
Everybody's pressed stop already anyway. But here's where I'm at. I don't think he did it. I don't think Rackstraw did it. I think he, again, is another one of these guys who was kind of a con artist and a liar and wanted to make himself out to be bigger than he was, and maybe like a psychopath and a megalomaniac and all that stuff. But to your point, I can't see him being this sophisticated veteran with all this experience jumping out of this plane in a suit with loafers on. That doesn't connect for me. Also, the picture doesn't connect for me. And a lot of people think Rackstraw is the guy, but Rackstraw in the picture looks to me like Paul Giamatti if he lost about 20 pounds. It does not look like D.B. Cooper. He's got a Giamatti look, and I'm kind of making a joke, but seriously, he does. So here's the other thing, and this is the thing that you never, something that's come up for us in the past is the intermingling of multiple theories.
Right.
I believe there's a couple of ways that this could be a different theory. I think that there's a lot of ways to look at it. I'm about to talk about my favorite suspect coming up. But before we even get to that idea, let's say my favorite suspect managed to get out of the plane with the money, but then lost the money on the way down and someone else found it. And then that person fenced the money with Briggs. Or let's say Rackstraw did do it and he was fencing the money with Briggs, and that Cooper didn't put him up to bearing it on the bank. It was money that he fenced it, he laundered for Briggs. I mean, Briggs laundered for Rackstraw, gave him the Krugerrands, but then never properly laundered the 5,800 himself for whatever reason. Maybe he laundered all the rest of it, but he kept this behind or couldn't get it, laundered or whatever. And so then he put it on the riverbank, no connection really to Rackstraw. Or maybe he was laundering it for Rackstraw, or maybe he had nothing to do with Rackstraw, or maybe someone else got the money out of the plane but lost it on the way down, and the money has its own separate tail entirely. All those things are possibilities, in my opinion. But I just don't see Rackstraw as Cooper based on behavioral observations. All due respect to these guys who've done a ton of work and have a very compelling story, and it'll make a great movie. But for me, I don't make it. So I'm not like necessarily, just so you know, when you're asking the counterpoints about the money on Tina Barr, I don't know. But I do know that there is some weirdness about it. And I also know that when you take a team of scientists out there and they're looking at it, they're trying to reverse engineer its arrival in a way based on its destination that might preclude an unnatural chain of events or interference from man on the chain of events that led the money to be there. So like the diatoms, okay, they had to happen here. Maybe they didn't. I'm not a scientist. obviously.
Right.
But like,
It's a time of year. So it could have happened anywhere. That's what I'm saying. That the mystery is still, how did the money end up there? That doesn't
Right.
answer the question. The diatoms don't answer that question.
That's
So
right.
the Ingrams were camping there on Sunday, February 10th, 1980. That means the money would have had to have been exposed in the previous spring in a watery condition.
Yeah, and I'm not sure based on the story. This might be in the book, and I'm not going to go back and try to look it up now. People should just read this
Yeah.
book. I don't want to give away the whole book or whatever. But like,
Right.
I don't think it's clear when the money might have been placed there. It's just that he knew it was there.
Yeah, but obviously somebody had to plant it there. So
Right, and
that's,
then that
I
would have
would
been
go
Briggs.
with,
Yeah.
right. And I'm just going to go with geologist Leonard Palmer. Now, Tom Kay and his team, as we said earlier, disagree with Leonard Palmer's estimation that the clay that it was found in, or that layer of clay, was from the dredging. They said that
Right.
could have been a natural process. But
Right.
both of them, I believe, unless I'm getting this wrong, both of them have ruled out that it could have been placed there purposely by a human, that it did arrive through hydrological processes from the river.
But here's the thing, and I'm looking back now at the book, The Last Master Outlaw. The night of the party, when he ostensibly identified the Ingrams and said, "There's money over there," that was 4 days before they found it on Tina Bar.
Mm-hmm.
However, what these two guys that knew Briggs also said was that he said on November 24th, he suggested they go to the 8th annual D.B. Cooper Day celebration in Woodland, Washington, and, quote, said, he told us he had gone up the year before, and this year he wanted them to go with him. There's a possibility there, I think, and I can't, like I said, I can't remember if the book points this out. I don't know if he does a supposition here, but that it was the year before that he planted the 5,800. So if he'd gone up for the festival the year before in November, it would have been there
Right.
through spring. It might have even been sitting on top of the sand in the spring and then sank. So there's a possibility that it had been there that long, and he was actually concerned no one was going to find it. Again, the question being, did Rackstraw order him to put it there? Or
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is that if you bury the bills, the fact is that you want them to be found. So why wait a year? You know what I'm saying? It's
well, that's the
they
thing.
don't
It's
do
like,
anybody
if you go
good.
tell somebody where it is, you're implicating yourself in the process. And in the
Right.
skyjacking and the statute, there's no statute of limitations. So
Yeah.
you tell somebody because you're drunk and a cocaine dealer and showing off to your friends. That's why you tell them.
Well, no,
I mean, because he wasn't, Briggs was not the brightest bulb, from my understanding from the book.
What I'm
So-
saying is that the gag doesn't work unless you tell somebody. So somebody had to be told. You can't just wait around for somebody
Well,
to
you might
to
think that, but the
find
book,
them on chance.
the book also indicates there was a guy that went fishing there every day, was always there, a guy with a beard, was like out there right
Right.
at that spot. It might have been a high traffic area, and he couldn't believe it wasn't getting discovered.
A lot
And
of
maybe he was getting
supposition
impatient.
here, a lot of speculation.
Agreed.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
yeah.
I agree with
Right.
you. I'm just,
Yeah.
it's an interesting
I
story.
hear you.
Okay.
It is. No, it's one of, that's what I'm saying. It's one of the best ones to be left for last, in that it's all very dramatic, a lot of danger and weirdness and psychology.
Yeah, I mean, I
here.
think Rackstraw is a fascinating dude. I still don't see him as the perpetrator, but hey, I have absolutely zero experience solving skyjackings. So,
well, after this 8-hour binge here,
Yeah.
you
we're
got
at
some.
4. We're at 4 hours raw. So I'm going to get to our
Okay.
last suspect here.
All right.
Kenneth Christensen. And I call this one The Inside Job.
Kenny.
Yeah, Kenny. KP, actually, to his friends. So this is from the book Into the Blast, the true story of D.B. Cooper, written by Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins. And Robert Blevins, you're going to be hearing a lot about tonight. This is out of Adventure Books of Seattle. We had the Kindle edition. I read this entire book as well. I found this greatly enjoyable. Neither one of these two books, Into the Blast nor The Last Master Outlaw, are particularly long. So if you're super into this, you could probably finish both of them in a week, especially if you're quarantined. I tried to cram them down in a couple of days, but I just wanted to get to the broad strokes here. So here is this quote. There is something you should know, but I can't tell you. These are some of the last words spoken by Kenny Christensen to his brother Lyle while Kenny lay dying of cancer in 1994. Lyle assured his brother that everything was all right and that whatever confession Kenny wanted to make was unneeded. Kenny Christensen passed away a short time later. His family was surprised to discover that Kenny had a substantial estate that belied his relatively modest income. There was a house and an adjoining lot in Bonnie Lake, Washington, owned free and clear, as well as valuable stamp and coin collections. His bank account showed a balance of nearly $200,000 in savings and an additional $21,500 in checking. It was true that late in life, Kinney had made a couple of minor land deals that brought in a modest profit. However, his family wondered how Kinney managed the transition from poverty to a man of relatively good means with no visible signs on how he did it. So here's my thing about Kinney. This guy is my guy, frankly. This is the dude, and I'm going to tell you why. The main reason for this, I'm just going to cut to the chase on this, is the photo. He is a dead match for the sketches, in my opinion, more than anybody else. Now, people have said that the eye color is off, because his eyes are brown and Cooper's eyes were described as hazel, or vice versa. I can't even remember now.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you again, I have hazel eyes and they look brown sometimes, and brown eyes, it's not like blue and brown or whatever. It doesn't make sense to me. But there's also, he was more bald than Cooper's portrayed in the pictures. And that was the thing I said earlier. However, his family said he would wear a toupee from time to time.
Right.
It's my opinion, though, even though I like Kinney for the crime, in 1971, toupee is not going to fool anybody. That's just what I think. But hey, what do I know? But listen to all this other stuff.
Hold on a second. What about William J. Smith? His 1985 photo, to me, looks like a dead ringer for a 40-year-old DB.
I think Kinney looks more like DB than Smith. I do.
Okay.
But if you look at them side by side, like I said, I'm going to make a big matrix of everybody, and we'll put that up. But well, listen to this. This is Agent Carr. There's a little quote from Agent Carr. This is from the Star Tribune out of Minneapolis. Headline, How the D.B. Cooper Mystery Got a Minnesota Twist. Yet another theory on a mysterious case. A retiree in Morris, Minnesota thinks that the missing hijacker D.B. Cooper was his brother, by John Tevlin. It's from November 19th, 2007. Agent Carr, Special Agent Carr's quote from that article. He had brown eyes. He was too short, Carr said. The stewardess who spent the most time with Cooper said he had hazel eyes and that she looked up to him, and she was 5'8". I'm not going to say it's not him, but I probably won't put a lot of effort into an investigation, end quote. So that's Carr's position. Again, I'm not sure his angle, and maybe it's just the height. It's interesting about the height, but by the same token, maybe Carr thinks it was Rackstraw, even though FBI dismissed Rackstraw. So he's leaning that way. It's hard to know, or they have someone else in mind that's not even public. But let's talk about Kinney a little bit. He worked for Northwest Airlines. In fact, and we alluded to this earlier in the series, he was on the Shimya Island in the Alaskan Aleutians, and that was a refuel point for Northwest. He stayed there on this island called the Rock for 4 years, and during that time, he met a lifelong friend named Bernie Geestman. More on that in a sec. But he was there a long time working on refueling planes for Northwest and maintenance, and he certainly would have learned a lot about them at the time. Bernie, his friend, was a flight mechanic, so higher up than Kinney, but later they were notedly together a lot in life, including at Bernie's wedding. Here's another thing about Kinney, and anybody that looks at the picture of the tie will know this. The tie clip is from a left-handed person. Kinney, too, was left-handed.
Is there, I guess there's no, right, from looking at it, there's no up or down position with the tie clip.
Right. So when the hijacking happened, Kinney was making $600 a month. He had no savings. 8 months after it, he bought a house. Now, the book, Into the Blast, says that the house was $16,500 and he paid cash for it, but that's actually not true. So a lot of people say that since he didn't pay cash for the house, that poo-poos this whole theory. But this was actually written by Robert Blevins, one of the co-authors of the book. He co-wrote Into the Blast. And this was from the D.B. Cooper Hijacking website. And I'm going to take an excerpt here. This was in March of 2018 that Mr. Blevins posted this. These days, when I do interviews, I often direct the media away from the book and toward the actual 54-page report we sent to the Seattle FBI in June 2015. The reason being, it is much more accurate than the 2011 book. However, the truth on how Kinney actually managed to buy that house in Bonnie Lake just 7 months after the hijacking is actually more convincing and better evidence against him than just plopping down cash for it. That type of purchase could be explained in any number of ways, none of which points to him as the hijacker without additional proof. When we discovered the full truth on the house, it was better evidence than just the idea of a cash purchase on approximately $15,000 home. Our error about the house purchase has been brought up time and again, and often other Cooper investigators use it to try and discredit the entire investigation into Christensen. In fact, it was another investigator who first brought this mistake to our attention. He presented a document showing that Christensen financed approximately half the purchase price by assuming a mortgage through Seattle First National Bank and took almost 19 years to pay it off. This investigator was right and we were wrong. However, the same investigator couldn't explain where the other half of the purchase price came from, and we wanted to find out. The best way to do that, we decided, was to investigate the previous owners of the home. Their names were Anne and Joe Grimes, and that's all we knew about them. After a while, we approached one of the major witnesses, Helen Jones of Sumner, Washington, a family friend of both Kenny and Bernie, and asked her if she knew anything about how Kenny bought the house. Jones said no, she did not, but that Bernie Geistman had been best man at the Grimes' wedding, and then presented pictures of Bernie at their wedding. And here's the thing about Geistman. When you see him being interviewed, you realize that he is nervous as a cat and cagey, and it's very strange. I'll just say that. We'll have a link to all the films associated with this, but you have to watch it. So here's a little further background on how this house might have been paid for. Helen Jones and her family hosted Thanksgiving dinners each year where both Kenny Christensen and Bernie and Margie, his wife, Geistman, always attended. Kenny and Bernie did not attend the Thanksgiving the Cooper hijacking occurred. And Jones said that when she saw Kenny a few weeks afterward, he admitted he was with Geistman that week, but wouldn't tell her where they were or what they had been doing. Checking further, we discovered that both Anne and Joe Grimes had passed away around 2005. I could not interview them, so I went to the next best source, their son, who lives in a small house near Rochester, Washington. He said that he didn't know a whole lot about the house sale, but there was a promissory note involved for about half the price of the house. When I asked him if his father was the type who would wait 19 years like the mortgage company did on the other half to get paid off on such a note, he laughed. Not a chance, he said. His dad was a cash on the barrelhead kind of guy and would have been paid off in a very short time, or he would have foreclosed or taken other action based on the note. Was there a copy of this note anywhere, I asked. He didn't know. Did Kenny ever pay it off? He said that if Kenny had failed to pay, his dad would have certainly taken back the house or forced Kenny to obtain an additional mortgage to pay his dad. He was just a young man at the time, he said, and didn't know all the details, but the one thing he was sure of was that his father would have wanted payment on that note, and in a quick, fast New York hurry. He was certain on that. So that goes to the whole point, because like people say, oh, we didn't pay cash for the house. That's one of these. They're saying, well, no, he did. He financed half of it, and then the other half was this promissory note. They can't find the note, but it makes more sense, honestly, and it's a little bit less suspicious. There were other things going on, though, and again, I'll come back to the fact that when he died, he had almost $200,000 in the bank. So that's the other interesting thing about Kenny. Now, there's a timeline here from the website, the DB Cooper Hijacking. This is on a blog, and again, this is from Mr. Blevins, who co-authored the book on Christensen. In this timeline, it talks about how in September 1949, he arrives on Shemya Island to work as a laborer for Northwest Airlines. Bernie Geistman was already there. And so, by the way, there's an implication from this book that these two worked together on the hijacking. So we get further into this. In March 1st of 1954, the Castle Bravo test is conducted. That's on the Bikini Islands. This is a nuclear test. April of 1955, Kenny is recruited from Shemya for a job working on Bikini Island. Geistman had ended his tour on Shemya and returned to work in Seattle, first for Northwest, then later for Boeing on the 727 program. This recruiting was done by a company called Holmes and Narver, who walked hand in hand with the AEC for many years. That's the Atomic Energy Commission. They were an engineering firm who performed all kinds of duties for the AEC in regard to atomic testing and nuclear facilities, both in and outside the U.S. We don't know whether Kenny saw an ad in the newspaper or was recruited by a rep of the company. We know that the job somehow originated on Shemya. So at the end, and then it goes on to say, at the same time this was all happening, government was doing secret research among the Marshall Islands native people, testing and recording their exposures to the many tests that were going on down there at the time. Later, this research was made public, but at the start, it was a secret program. So all of this is to point out that he was sent possibly from Shemya to the Bikini Atoll to see how he would react to being present a year after a nuclear test had happened. The bombshell, one of the bombshells at the end of this particular segment that's that Mr. Blevins put on the website is that this is obviously very unfair. And he says some payback for a decorated World War II era Army paratrooper who was gay and kept it hidden to serve his country. This is not in the book. And it goes on to say, that's right, Christensen was gay and his family knew it when he told them he was joining the Army in his senior year of high school. They warned him that could happen. If he were discovered, it could mean anything from a dishonorable discharge to prison in Leavenworth. He joined anyway, and the Army never found out a thing. Kenny had told his family he could do it, and he did, passing some of the toughest training ever done with U.S. Army paratroopers, because they were preparing for an invasion of mainland Japan. Very few knew the atomic bomb was coming and would soon end the war. Kenny was one out of less than 80 who passed training out of a group of nearly 300 men. He was certainly no slouch, and after the Japanese signed the surrender on the USS Missouri, Kinney was sent to serve in occupied Japan. He did parachute jumps to qualify for the extra pay and an occasional jump for civilians as well while he served in Japan. His letters home to family in Minnesota are clear. So he works on the Bikini Atoll, and this is important because later he's going to die of cancer, and his family thinks that that's where he contracted it. So coming back now to Seattle in 1955, he's doing odd jobs. He's hardly making any money. He gets rehired at Northwest as a purser, as a flight attendant, essentially. Northwest decides to count his previous service on Shimya as still valid and discards the time he was either between jobs or on Bikini Atoll. Because of this, he got a congratulatory letter from the CEO of Northwest and a silver bowl on the same day the FBI bypassed the statute of limitations on the Cooper hijacking, November 24th, 1976, 5 years after the hijacking. The letter notes his failure to attend the banquet held in Minneapolis for the other 25th anniversary with the airline employees. The famous John Doe warrant was obtained by the FBI on the very last day before the statute was due to expire and is available at FBI.gov. So he's saying here, if Kinney was the hijacker, it was probably the lowest day of his life. Since this news was broadcast and printed all over the Northwest when it happened, if Kinney was Cooper, it must have been crushing to say the least, because the point was now he couldn't go. He didn't want to go to that ceremony. So he thought maybe he was going to be free and clear. The statute of limitations was expired, but they extended it. So all of this, there's more details that go on here, and we have links to this article. But what it comes down to is that Bernie Geisman and his wife and Kinney were all friends. And it's funny, when I read the book, I thought, or I was speculating, it wasn't implied in the book, but it was clear that Kinney and Geisman's wife, Margie, were very, very, very close. And Geisman was abusive. And at some point, Kinney had helped her to buy a house and get moved out. And that's why Geisman, when he's interviewed in these documentaries, he's or in this one documentary, you look at him and you go, oh, he's hiding something. This is all very weird. This is strange. What is he hiding? And it's possible that he was Kinney's, he helped Kinney with either directly with the kidnapping or after the kidnapping with the money or whatever. And I thought for a minute that because Kinney and Margie were so close, that maybe Kinney and Margie had a relationship, so that they had sort of a love triangle situation going on, where Kinney and Geisman had been on the crime together, but were at odds because of differences over this woman. That was my internal speculation that I might have even put forth. But then reading this recent post from Mr. Blevins about Kinney being gay, I understand now that Kinney and Margie probably were just really close. And he was trying to take care of her, because what everyone is saying about Kinney, all these witnesses, whether he did this or not, was that he was a sweet, kind, and generous man. And he helped people out with all this money that he mysteriously got. So this is all coming back around. So when you look at the timeline of events and the talk to these witnesses about Kinney, what you find out is that they were not present for this Thanksgiving dinner that they should have been at, Kinney and Bernie. They weren't there. And after that, Kinney seemed to have a ton of money. So I want to come down to this one last interview that's in the book that I thought was interesting. This is a witness named Dawn J. She was a sister-in-law to a woman who was divorced from Bernie, the sister-in-law. When I asked her whether she had received a $5,000 cash loan from Kinney in early 1972, she said yes. He gave it to Mike, and then Mike gave it to me. I used it to put a down payment on a house in Sumner. Kinney said I could have 4 years to pay it back, but I paid it back in 2. How do you think Kinney got the money? I asked. His job, I suppose, she said. He told everyone he made good money at Northwest. At the time he gave me the loan, I said he was taking home less than $600 a month. She was mildly surprised at this. Well, I don't know. He just told me people made a lot of money with the airline. She pointed to a very nice clock on the wall. He gave me that as a gift after one of his trips to Japan. It was an expensive-looking handmade cuckoo clock. I asked if she'd received the clock after 1971. She said yes. I took out a photo that I downloaded from the Seattle FBI's website entry on the D.B. Cooper case. It was a picture of the black JCPenney tie with the mother-of-pearl tie clasp that the hijacker had left behind before he jumped. I pushed the photo across the table and said, "Does this picture mean anything to you?" "Well, I don't know about the tie," she said, "but I saw Kinney wearing that tie tack a couple of times." "Are you sure?" "Oh, yes, he had one just like it." I could hardly believe my ears. No one had ever linked the tie or the clip to a specific person before, and Dawn had just dropped an ID on it as casually as anything, and she had done it before she understood the significance of it. I hadn't told her anything about Kinney being a suspect in the hijacking. So he goes on, he takes her on a little bit further, and then he starts to indicate that he might have been the hijacker. And she says, well, it could be true. It would explain a lot of things people wondered about Kenny. I asked her if she ever suspected that Kenny could be D.B. Cooper. Yes, I wasn't the only one who wondered about it either, but none of us ever asked him. Some of us were friends back there in Bonnie Lake. We did things together. Now everybody's gone or moved. Kenny never talked about the hijacking. I always thought that was strange because everyone talked about it for months, and he worked for the airline, so you would think he might have an opinion, but he never said a word about it. Well, why didn't any of you ask him if he was the guy? It would have been bad manners, she said. He worked for the airline, and he was a nice guy. No one was going to ask that to his face. Besides, he didn't look like a criminal. You said he was a paratrooper in the Army? Yes, ma'am. Funny, he never said anything about it. How sure are you that D.B. Cooper was Kenny? I'm not sure. Maybe 60, 70%, I said. The investigation is ongoing. So that's where he got all that money, she said. Figures. So he goes on to say, did Kenny ever wear a toupee? She told him yes, but he never wore it on the job. It's only socially sometimes and not very often. And she also said she hadn't seen him wear it after 1971, that he took to wearing hats instead. Another witness that he spoke to in the book, Helen Jones, she had told a whole story that explained how Kenny wasn't in the right place for Thanksgiving that year. She also had said that she thought he smoked Camels. She got back in touch with Mr. Blevins later. I was wrong on something about Kenny. He didn't smoke Camels. When I smoked, that was my brand. He smoked Raleighs. I remember that because he saved the coupons. All the butts on the plane were Raleigh cigarettes. So we're coming back down here to the end of the line, and this is what I think about with this. I think Kenny couldn't make any money with Northwest. I think his story is really fascinating. He's out on Shimmy Island for 4 years. Then he goes to the Bikini Atoll. He's exposed to what eventually will kill him while working there. He comes back. He's working at Northwest, which strikes so many times. They go on strike. Their union goes on strike so much they call it Cobra Airlines because it will strike at anything. And he can't make any money. He's actually digging ditches for his friends to make ends meet, making a couple $100s a month. And when he died, though, he had $186,000 in his main bank account. The thing about him is, though, everybody speaks really, really highly of him and said that after he got this money, he was helping everyone out and that he was a nice guy. For example, listen to this, and we might have mentioned this in an earlier part. I can't remember because it was 5 years ago. After Tina Mucklow instructed him on how to lower the stairs, Cooper startled her by pulling 2 or 3 bundles of the ransom money from the sack. He held it out to her. Take it, he said. It's yours. Each bundle consisted of $2,000 in 20s, although some were slightly more and others slightly less. She refused the money. All right, he said. Go up front and stay with the others and close the curtains between first class and coach. That's from Into the Blast by Skip Porteous and Mr. Blevins. So that's the guy he was. And one of the things that these people all said about him was that he was a kind-hearted person. And the thing that seems to be coming out about Mr. Geisman was that maybe not so much. In fact, there were documents associated with the purchase of Margie's house that supposedly Kenny had had a hand in, the divorced wife of Mr. Geisman, that after Kenny died, her ex-husband, Geisman, Bernie, came to the house and stole the papers. And there's the idea that that could have somehow connected him because now the main suspect for Mr. Cooper is dead. The statute of limitations isn't up. Even though they told him when they interviewed him, you're not implicated because you're not the hijacker. It is up. He didn't want to say anything about it. And he also was cagey about how close they were. Then once he was confronted with pictures of them together, including at his wedding, he said, well, yeah, I knew him. Also, when he was digging the ditch for his friends for money, that was the Geismans. So they clearly were all connected. And I think that for me, especially when you look at the picture of Kenny and you look at the sketches of D.B. Cooper, for me, my money is on Kenny Christensen being or having been D.B. Cooper.
Well,
have I convinced you? Well, I mean, what do you think of the
all
picture?
the people,
when you look at that picture, what do you think?
It's close.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think if you're, well, here's the thing. Okay, we're going to have the photos up. You're going to make that. I don't know when you're going to do it, but you're going to make that side-by-side comparison. I just now looked up pictures of Kenny Christensen back in the day, and there is a composite here. I think New York Magazine has one. It's close, and then you look at the aged photo. But I said, if you're just going by looks, to me, and again, it's very subjective, but if you're going by looks, then Mr. Smith is the one who looks to me like at age progressed photo, William J. Smith. But he has less things going on. I'm talking about like the squareness of the head.
Yeah.
If you look at Cooper's hairline.
Yeah, you're right.
And again, some of those
there's
things could be off.
similarities. Yeah, there are
There's
similarities.
similarities. And that's what I'm saying. If you go by Robert Rackstraw's photo, that doesn't really fit Cooper.
Yeah.
If you look at, like I said, if you're just going by looks and an age progression, I'm going to bet my money on William J. Smith. But again, a lot of those things don't line up. So if you're looking at Kenny, yeah, it's in the ballpark. But it's the rest of the story that is a lot more compelling. Everything else that happened. Let me ask you this. After 1971, and I may have missed this, but how long was Kenny not on the scene? How long was he missing, let's say, after the crime? I'm just trying to picture, if he did do the hijacking, where does he pop up again?
He popped up a few weeks later with the family.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the family. But reading the book, what was the reason for him going missing?
He wouldn't make it clear. He just changed the subject and said he was doing something else.
But to his family, he was gone for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then his buddy Bernie, where was he during this
Also
time?
gone.
So from what I know of the story, they didn't make Thanksgiving, which would have been in the next day. And they were just both gone for a week.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other knock against this is that what you're talking about, the money, is that suddenly he seemed to have a lot of cash, but some sources say, well, yeah, half that cash that he bought that house for, he got a lot of that cash from making these real estate trades on the side.
Right.
And then the real truth, or what people who knew him said, is like, well, half that was in cash, and then the other one was from all of his investments and such. He may have lost some of the money, but here's the other thing is that
Well, here's an interesting thing. In that book, when the book was published in 2011, they didn't name Bernie Geisman. They used a pseudonym for him, but now everybody knows about Geisman because he was later in this documentary. The pseudonym is Mike, okay? And so Mike is the one here in this section. I'll read you this section. After about 30 minutes of patiently listening to this, I decided to take a chance and try and pin her down. And he's talking to Mike's ex-wife, who calls Mike, which is Bernie Geisman, a liar and a crook. All right. Everything but the hijacking. So he says, I asked her what she was doing on Thanksgiving weekend, 1971, and how she remembered the hijacking. Well, I was at home in Bonnie Lake. We didn't have a television at that time, but I remember listening all day about it on the radio. Where was Mike? And that would be Bernie. He was gone for a few days. With that, she told me an incredible story. Not long before the hijacking, she said Mike, again, Bernie, had bought a used station wagon from a car lot near Aberdeen, Washington, and an Airstream trailer at a bank sale. He told her they would use it for camping, but instead of bringing it home, he drove it down to some property they owned in Oakville, 60 miles south of Bonnie Lake, and parked it. When she asked him why he was leaving it on the empty property, he said, I know what I'm doing, and gave no other explanation.
Okay.
She said that someone might come along and either steal it or vandalize it. Mike told her to quit worrying. 2 days after the hijacking of Flight 305, Mike took off in his car and didn't tell Katie, that's Margie, or Margie.
Yes, could be Margie.
It could be Margie. I know a Margie, and she spells it the same way before people come after me. 2
There's
days
also a Markie Post.
Yes, there is a Margie, which is just Markie. But 2 days after the hijacking of Flight 305, Mike took off in his car and didn't tell Katie where he was going. Any plans for Thanksgiving were abandoned. Mike Watson, that's Bernie Geisman, Kenny Christensen, and Katie Watson, again, Margie, or Margie, were supposed to have Thanksgiving dinner with some mutual friends in Sumner, Washington, a family both Kenny and the Watsons knew. Mike Watson returned a few days later and told his wife he had gone camping with a friend, but refused to name the friend. So that's the whole rest of the story. So what's happening here is the idea, Mike being Bernie, is that Bernie said he was camping with a friend, and the friend that he was camping with was Kenny, and it was Kenny rendezvousing with Bernie after he jumped out of the plane with the money. And then later he had a bunch of money, and he loaned money to pretty much all these people and also bought a bunch of stuff for cash, even if it wasn't outright, but he clearly had more funds at his disposal than he had ever had before when he used to have to dig ditches just to pay his rent for a small apartment.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not saying it's Kenny. I'm just saying it's Kenny.
Yeah.
That's me. That's where I'm at. Kenny Christensen. That's my.
I think he's the most likely suspect. So in this pretty compelling story, then Bernie is also sharing in the loot.
Yeah, I think things went well for Bernie too. Like everybody got a little something. It seemed like Kenny was, was described as generous.
Okay. And then their story has no explanation for the money that the 5,800 that ends up on Tina Bar.
No, I don't believe it does. If it does, I don't remember it.
Right.
Blevins might have said something about it on his blog. I mean, just to tell people, there's just absolute tons, I'm leaving out a bad word there, of information about this crime and all these suspects.
It's weird.
It's the deepest rabbit hole there ever was, which is why we're doing a bonus show that took us over 4 hours to record and has,
goodness.
And is not producing any revenue because we want to entertain you.
I don't know if
and
it's
we had to say this.
We
got to say that we had to get this out. Yeah, it's not. We've lost people. I'm going to try to cut it down, but
that's okay.
It is what it is.
Well, look, if you're just put us on the background while you're vacuuming.
We should have said
really
that
what you're doing, or you fall asleep to this because we didn't. Scott did not post another Ocean Waves audio recording.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is just as soothing. But if you're into the subject at all. I think this was the person of interest to do the deepest dive on. He's certainly the most compelling, and he ends up dying of cancer because of his Bikini Atoll exposure. I was thinking that you were leading there before that he was terminally ill and didn't really care, so he did the stunt. But the motivation is...
I don't think he necessarily knew that at the time of the crime.
No,
but again, it's hard for me to pin down all these timelines and all these people. There's probably holes in what I've said. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of corrections and people who disagree with things, but we did our best to give the broad overview on it. And, and I can get into my conclusions, which are pretty brief at this point. If you're
I just a couple more questions, I think. So the story ends, basically they end up with a little bit of money. No one ever really explains. I guess they wouldn't come forward with the getaway plan other than the trailer was involved. The trailer that was purchased for the camping trip.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And let me ask you this, and this probably should have been covered in the book. Why did the FBI not really drill down on Kenny?
I don't know. I mean, you heard Special Agent Carr, said he was too short and his eye color didn't match.
Yeah, that was one of them. Yeah, he did not totally fit the description. Plus, he was thinner. I think he was around 150 pounds at the time. DB was described as being stockier, 180 to 200.
Yeah, but Kenny also was described as having olive skin, so he was swarthy.
They were both swarthy. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of elements that do line up.
There's a lot of other things going on here, and especially with a lot of these suspects, really, there's lots of ways that you can have windfall income that isn't necessarily on the books. And it is one of the things that's suggested is that Kenny made some savvy land deals and made some money from those. However, that's a lot of money to have in 1971, even on the savviest land deal. So, just because somebody bought something for cash and, right before that there was skyjacking doesn't mean that it's the same MO.
No,
but
that's my point. I just thought of something here. You tell me if this probably has no application at all to what we're talking about. But I always thought, when you're a kid, like picking lottery numbers, which you're trying to solve, you're trying to crack that code.
Yeah.
And what we now know statistically is like if you pick, it's 6 numbers, right? The lotto. And you play the ticket that has the most picked 6 numbers, that rarely wins at all. Maybe a few times, but everywhere I've read, it's like, if you pick the 6 most popular numbers that come up all the time, that combination doesn't work. My point being here is that if you, out of all these characters, like if, as I'm saying, you took all these coincidences that happen about all the suspects that you just mentioned, and you compile them into one person, is it now overwhelming, or are you still missing the mark and that it doesn't make it any more likely?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the real perpetrator might not even be on this list.
Right. All right. Right. Well, tell me about your final conclusions then.
Well, I guess my conclusions are, I mean, I've already said that I thought it was Kenny. Out of all these people, he's the guy I like the most for it. I love that you reminded me that when they used to say in the old days, I like him for this crime, because I do.
Well,
I like him
no,
for this
to
crime.
that point though, and yeah, I get we may be missing something here, but what you're saying is that all the FBI said about Kenny Christensen as a suspect is that he does not fit the physical profile. That's the main point why they dismissed this. They
That
didn't go into it,
No,
and
there may be more details than that. I'm not sure if there was a fingerprint check with him. Right
right,
now, I can't recall off the top of my head, but like that, I know
and
that. I mean,
yeah,
and I just read it a few minutes ago. Special Agent Carr said, "Well, his eye color doesn't match, and he's not the right
right,
height. So if I'm going to look into it, I'm not going to look that hard." Essentially, was quote we
yes,
just read a few
right,
minutes ago. So
right. And there may be other factors, and of course, as we said, we're not going to dive into the conspiratorial tone, but yeah, a lot of people would say like, well, yes, they didn't check into him as a suspect because he's somehow involved in some kind of plot that benefits the FBI, or there's something going on why they wouldn't want to look at him. People will do that, but I would say just at face value, there are reasons we may not know why the FBI has dismissed him or cleared him as a
well,
suspect.
yeah, they may have somebody else that they're really zeroed in on, or they're convinced
Right.
is the person, but they can't
Yeah.
quite bring charges or do anything about it right now.
Well,
So that
that's yes, and that's the whole point about this. We said at the beginning, at the end, towards the end of part one, is that that is the FBI's stance: is that this is all very juicy, sexy stuff, but not enough to bring a case,
Yeah, which
not enough to
again
prosecute.
makes it the perfect crime. Again, and what people like about it is that he got away with it. Whoever this person is, right now he got away with it. There's some other things
It's your definition about getting away with it, but we'll talk about that in my conclusions.
yeah, I mean, well, I mean, the other thing I'm going to say, and this won't take me long, is and it's something we've touched on before when it comes to great fortunes found in the woods dangling from a dead guy in a parachute.
Right.
A lot of times you
Right.
find $200,000 in the woods, and if you can spend it, you might just take it upon yourself, some people, to disappear the guy in the parachute and take the money
Sure.
and not report it. You still have the problem with the serial numbers, but they said themselves in all these investigations they probably stopped looking at those after about 6 months. So you just lay low for a while.
Yeah.
You can go right
Yeah.
out and spend it. So
Well,
there's not
that's
going to be any story about that if that
yeah.
happens.
Well, that's one quick thing here I'll say about the serial numbers, in that I was old enough at the time. I remember us kids checking our bills. I mean, of course, I wasn't that old in 1971, but I remember it's a thing in that just for fun, us kids like, hey, what if we got any DB Cooper bills? And there was a list of serial numbers that would occasionally get reprinted in the Northwest papers, and people would look. But I don't think that we did any research to find out if there's an automated way, like say the bills came back to a bank, a Federal Reserve Bank, where they're scanned, if they're scanned automatically to look for those numbers, much like a zip code is scanned on a piece of mail by the post office.
Yeah, but going back to the Record Act and what they used supposedly to scan the serial numbers in the first place before the money was distributed, that was
Right,
only a method of capturing it and putting it on a small storage format like
right.
microfiche or microfilm. There was no AI component. So the only way that it would be scanned would still involve a human. It would just be the pictures would be taken, but you'd still have to look at them to identify the numbers and compare them.
Okay. That's my only
There
point
was
here
no
is that,
software to do anything like that in
no, that's what I'm
71.
saying. I don't think there's any scanning technique or machinery to look at the bills as they pass through the system, going from bank to bank, because then that rules out Kenny being afraid to spend the cash on anything
Right.
or finding a way to launder the money. And we don't know that, but it's probably just out there. And of course, to the FBI, nothing's ever been reported, nothing's ever been found, except for the Tina bar cash.
Right, which is interesting. So again, like I said, who knows? Somebody could have found the money and not reported it. Found the body, disappeared the body of whoever it was, and disappeared the evidence and made off with the money. The other thing is, a lot of these suspects, a lot of them look a lot like the sketch. A
Yeah.
lot of them do.
Yeah.
So this is where I come up with my multiverse theory. I think they all did it
Okay.
in different realities, and there's a
Yeah.
rift in space-time centered around this crime, and we're all looking into the different possibilities for DB Cooper. But I'm joking about that, but seriously, one thing that you see when you look at all these suspects is that a good portion of them had the skills to do it, and they could have
Right.
done it if it had occurred to them. which is what makes an investigation like this so hard, I imagine. Because it's like, you know what? 6 or 7 of these folks are experienced at jumping out of planes. These 3 are
Yeah.
reckless. These ones are known liars and con men. This one's a gambler. There's motives all around the board, And
Right.
the other thing I've been sort of alluding to all the way up to this point is that people that did these kind of crimes all wanted to be this kind of person. They all wanted to be
Yeah.
the guy that pulled this off. So of course
Right.
they're all bragging about how it was them because they're already living a life of mystery and they want to be bigger than they already are. They want to be remembered, respected by people that maybe knew they were never up to much, or they gambled all their money away, or their family knew they were a con artist. And it's like, oh yeah, but I did this, and we've already said that a few times. And then
Right.
you've already made the point about the Deathbed Confessions. I can't
Mhm.
think, especially if you're a con artist with a good sense of humor. Like I could see my grandfather, God rest his soul. I could see him thinking it would be funny right before he died to say that he was DB Cooper.
That's what I'm
So
saying.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's just there's a lot of ways that it could have gone down. But out of this list, and based on what we've learned in just a month, which isn't a lot of time, or 3 weeks really, and I want to read all these other books, the other suspect books, because I only read 2 of them and I skimmed the other ones, and the rest of the research was web-based. But my money for now is on Kenny, and Rackstraw's probably a runner-up because there's a lot to that. But like I said, that story feels a lot circumstantial to me, and it feels like heavily laden with confirmation bias. Although the book about Kenny feels laden with confirmation bias too. But I still felt like it held up. I mean, and you don't write a book like that if you don't believe the guy you're writing about did it. But still, it's looking at the big picture of everyone. And then again, maybe it's one of these people that we don't know much about and I dismissed right at the top of the suspect list. I just don't know. But Kenny is my favorite.
but
That's what I'm going to say.
Keep in mind, the author is also the private investigator contacted by Kenny's brother, Lyle, right?
Yes.
That's another interesting side note. Lyle had tried to convince the FBI that his brother was the man, I believe, after seeing a documentary in 2003.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Is that the one we were talking about? So
I think so. Yeah.
he sees that and says, "Oh my gosh, that's Kenny."
Right.
Suddenly, the light bulb goes off. He tries to convince the FBI. They're not that interested. They're not buying his story. Then he reaches out to screenwriter, director, and novelist Nora Ephron, which is kind of funny, in that he was hoping that she would do a movie on it. And of course, if you don't know that name, some of the famous films she's written: Silkwood, You've Got Mail, Sleepless in Seattle, When Harry Met Sally. So that's who she is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think she ever bid on that or didn't want to be involved. But it's just interesting that we know about this really because his brother Lyle came forward with the conclusion. So anyway, well, there you go. I think that out of all the people you presented, Kenny is the strongest. I'll give Rob Rackstraw a runner-up, and the rest are kind of almost rans.
All right, you still haven't said what you think. What's your final conclusion? What let's
what I think is most likely in something like this, he did not survive the jump. That's what I'm going with.
Okay.
If he had, then yeah, these 2 dudes, Kenny, Robert Rackstraw, runner-up. That's my final offer. That's what's on the table. But most likely, after looking at everything, yes, I do believe it's possible. Certainly, he could have survived the jump. But I just think in those conditions that, I'm not an expert on this. I would say his chances at survival were probably 10 to 15%.
And you think after all this time and in this day and age, and even back then with satellites and being able to look at dated satellite images, and also all the people, all the larger population now that's out in the woods camping and doing all that stuff, that no one ever found a trace of his body, his parachute, or the money, or the bomb suitcase, or any of the stuff he left the plane with. It just all disappeared and so far has never been found.
No, if you take all that into account, part of the money was found in a really weird place that explains nothing. It adds nothing but more questions to the case. But to that other point, that's why I brought up the tragic case of Barbara Ann Derry, who is the 18-year-old student found in the grist mill, in the mini silo there. And that here you have all the authorities searching the area. You have the Army, sheriff's deputies, you've got volunteers, you've got FBI, you've got all these people searching. And here's an abandoned building where most likely, if somebody's on the run, good place to hide, to duck out, get out of the weather, out of the rain at least. And they didn't check it. Or if they checked it, they didn't find her there. And it took a woman and maybe her friend who were out looking for old bottles to discover her. So my point is that if you're diving into the woods, maybe they would have found your parachute hung up in a tree. Maybe not. We've covered this quite a bit, in that things out in the wild can disappear very easily and are never seen again. And in very dense woods like that, it's very possible that, it's out there. It's just no one's ever tripped on it because no one's ever taken a direct route through very dense brush in the woods. And on the other hand, parachutes were found buried and dug up, but not the ones that would match the ones that Cooper had. So stuff's out there and it gets discovered. You can't count on it. It's like when people say, oh, look, hunters are all over the woods. How come they haven't seen Bigfoot yet? It's like, you can't possibly cover that vast of space. And also, as we said earlier, Mount St. Helens may have covered up a lot of the evidence, or the body itself. That ash was 6 inches to several feet deep in places. So you'll never see that again. That's also a definite possibility of why you've never seen it again, or he'll never be found again. So I'll take the FBI stance here, in that it's just not enough yet to convince me 100%. But if I had to pick two people, I'll go with your two picks here as being the most likely suspects. In the end here, I'll just leave you with this quote from Margie Geistman to Skip Porteous and Robert Blevins for their book, Into the Blast, The True Story of D.B. Cooper. You're not going to make Kenny look bad, are you? No matter what he may have done, he was a nice guy.
That's going to wrap up our series on D.B. Cooper. We're dark until October 10th, when we'll return with our first show of the spooky season. However, we do have a very special announcement coming up near the end of the month, so keep an eye out for that.
Please remember to support our sponsors. They help keep the show free and the lights on in Blanket Fortiana.
Special thanks to John Bolin. Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also our head of research.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane, and our sound design and additional composing is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the Astonishing Research Corps.
But most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
You can also support the show at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.